Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the RF2 Asia Endurance Series. My name's Lachlan Andrews, and join us for the next 2.4 hours as we get ready for the fourth round of the RF2 Asia Endurance Series. This will be the 2.4 hours of Interlagos, which it will be host the final 2.4-hour race of the season, as we are approaching the final end of the season with the last round being 6 hours. But for today, we are expecting a very large field of 20 vehicles so far currently out on the circuit doing the final couple of laps in the warm-up session as they prepare for the race that is sure to get underway very shortly. Currently on the timing screens with the warm-up session, we have Ed on the top with the time of 1 minute 25.7, followed by championship leader Jose Barringa. Oh wait, I'm sorry actually. Jose Barringa is 5th in the championship, my mistake. But he currently running in second with a time of 1 minute 25.9. Rick Scott is in third with a time of 1 minute 28. With the times being so different, we're expecting a bit of rain throughout the session for the race. So the drivers are going to have very tricky conditions to master for the whole 2.4 hours this race will be. But we are now 25 seconds away from the end of the warm-up session, and we are seeing good lap times by all the drivers so far, with the fastest GT lap time by Jalul with a time of 1 minute 34.05, followed by Alexis Clapano, who will be racing solo, as his teammate Lewis Morano won't be participating in this round, with a time of 1 minute 34.5 as the session has come to an end. We have seen that Edmund Wong has finished the session on top with a time of 1 minute 25.7. We are expecting some very difficult conditions for today's race, as we are expecting patchy rain all throughout, so this is going to add extra strategy for the drivers to switch to potentially rain tyres as the race progresses. But as the warm-up session has completed, we are now 30 seconds away from the warm-up lap of the 2.4 hours of Interlagos. We are at the Interlagos circuit for the fourth round, which is a very tricky circuit in the dry, but added the extra rain to it, it will be quite challenging for all drivers in Prototype and GT. With about 15 corners or so and a lap length of 4.3 kilometers or 2.6 miles, it's a slightly shorter track compared to what we're usually used to throughout the season. But Jose Barringa currently running on pole position with starting on the front row. He is going to be joined by his teammate Marco Antonio Rodriguez, who he is actually leading the championship after having a very good round at the 2.4 hours of Suzuka. So it's a 1-2 for the Spanish World of Sim Racing team. But following them, we have Edmund Wong in third place with Kelvin Wong in fourth. Daryl Brady will line up in 5th alongside Rick Scott. Rick Hyde in 7th with Sebastian Rodriguez in 8th, who is actually his home race for tonight. He's gotten up really early to participate in this event, and we want to wish him all the best of luck for this round. Next to him is lining up on 9th on the grid is Alexis Clapano, who's looking to hopefully get another win this round, as he and his teammate Lewis Morano has claimed 3 wins so far this season. Jalul lines up on 10th place, followed by Quinton Plain running the number 28 Corvette, followed by Mark Robertson, Andrew Alvarez, first of the couple of World of Sim Racing team GTs. So we're not only having 2 prototypes but also 2 GTs lining up today. In 14th we have Gu J. Carr. He is in 15th place we have Chris Payne, who is accompanied by Dean Jose. In 17th place we have David Hoyo. In 18th place we have Don Napa. And on the final row of the grid we have Christian Pugh, followed by in 20th place, starting from the back of the grid, we have Muhammad Azkar. The drivers are currently making their way around the circuit. We are now just moments away from the start of the Interlagos 2.4 hours, the last 2.4 hour race of the season. So the drivers are going to be looking to get as much points as they can, as the final round will be a very long endurance race. We have Jose Barringa, the winner of the last round at Suzuka. He's hopefully going to have the momentum to potentially come away with another win. He's currently 5th in the championship, but hopefully with the next round he could be able to score some more points and be in the running. But it's Marco Antonio Rodriguez lining up alongside him, who is now the new championship leader by only 6 points after the issue with Aaron Taruna and Fahed Gafour in the last round. But as they head around the final couple of corners, we're about to get ready underway with the race. The safety car is about to pull in. So now all the drivers will be lining up, packed all together. The first corner is going to be quite tricky for these drivers, especially knowing that it is wet. Drivers are getting ready. Drivers are lined up, and it's lights out, and away we go for the 2-point matter of Interlagos as Jose Barringa goes into an early lead into the first corner. Edmund Wong tried to have a go at Marco Rodriguez as the drivers head into the first corner. We have Jose Barringa currently in the lead, followed by Edmund Wong, who's managed to move up in second. The car has gone off the circuit. It's a multi-car pile-up here. We have Jalul. It appears to be also Marco Antonio Rodriguez, the championship leader, has spun on the first corner, and he's taken Gu J-Car with him, and Pirilla Jalul, who appears to have lost his front bumper, so all three cars may have potential damage. But out in front, Jose Barringa maintains a 0.3 of a second lead over Edmund Wong, who is coming under pressure from Daryl Brady, who's looking to have a go at, but he gives a little bit of contact coming into this very tight corner. Kelvin Wong is not too far behind the guys, but he's coming under a little bit of pressure from Rick Hyde and Rick Scott. Is for 4th place, but Sebastian Rodriguez currently takes the GT, maintains the GT lead. Alexis Clapano is only a second or so behind, but he will be coming under quite a bit of pressure from several drivers, as Quinton Plain is coming under a lot of pressure from Andrew Alvarez. But Jose Barringa will finish the first lap in the lead with a gap of 2 seconds over Daryl Brady, so that's a really good start for Jose Barringa. But Marco Antonio Rodriguez will be trying to make a lot of ground back up, but it's a good thing it is 2.4 hours. We've only got 143 minutes left to go. But it appears that also Mark Robertson might have a little bit of damage to his Aston Martin, not too sure by the looks of it. But we're currently the first lap completed. Daryl Brady is coming under pressure a bit more once again from Edmund Wong. He goes a little bit wide. Edmund Wong will take that place. Edmund Wong will now move up into 2nd place. But the battle won't be over for these two drivers, as they've been battling hard for the last lap and a half. But Kelvin Wong is several seconds further behind, but he's coming under pressure from Rick Scott, who has managed to overtake Rick Hyde in the last couple of corners. Sebastian Rodriguez maintains the lead of the GT class by about 2 or so seconds over Alexis Clapano. So Clapano will be trying to push hard to gain another position to take the GT class lead. But as Marco Antonio Rodriguez is battling with GTs as he tries to move his way back up the grid, the GT drivers have done a good job. Quinton Plain made a good move by letting the prototype through, knowing he's not competing against the prototype. But he will lose time over David Hoyo in the number 13, I believe, the number 13 BMW. But still out in front, and now opening a further gap of 5.09 seconds is Jose Barringa. But Edmund Wong has managed to get away slightly over Daryl Brady, who Daryl Brady had a bit of a good start, but now is running good in 3rd. Kelvin Wong currently in 4th place under pressure from Rick Hyde. Sebastian Rodriguez is in 6th overall and 1st in the GT class, but Alexis Clapano has closed the gap. Rick Scott is down in 8th place. He's lost a couple of positions. He must have had some sort of issue just moments ago. but he will be moving to overtake those GTs as he looks to be doing it right now, but he will be taking his time knowing he has quite a while to go with this race. But Andros Alvarez currently sits in third in GT class, followed by Dean Jose. Mohammed Azkar has moved up several spots, missing all the incidents that have occurred on the first couple of laps or so to get himself into a better position as Marco Antonio Rodriguez moves up another spot to get himself a bit further back up the field. David Hoyo currently running in 13th overall, followed by Quinton Plain, who is now coming under pressure from Mark Robertson in the Darrell Lee Aston Martin. Chris Payne is in 16th place, a bit further behind as he goes quite a bit wide in the Ferrari, Tri-Continental Ferrari. Gu J Carr is currently running in 17th place. Despite having issues on the opening laps, he doesn't appear to have any damage, so he'll most likely try and continue. Christian DeQ runs in 18th place overall, and Parawara Jalul runs currently 19th place after having a spin that involved J Carr and Marco Antonio Rodriguez on the first corner. He is going to have a lot of work ahead of him if he wants to get himself into some better positions. And down in 20th place is Don Napa in the nice, beautifully green liveried Aston Martin with appears to be no damage, so he must have had some sort of incident as Quinton Plain goes into the pit lane, potentially having started the race on slick tyres maybe, as the track is currently wet at the moment. Several drivers may have to pit at some point because of the wet weather, but the racing line does appear to be slightly dry as Jose Barrenca currently extends his lead even further over Edmund Wong, who's currently sitting in second place in the prototype class and overall. Darrell Brayley has dropped down quite a bit. He's decided to take a bit of a conservative approach now after the first couple of laps is completed. Rick Hyde currently sits in fourth in the prototype class, with Rick Scott a bit further away behind, 8 seconds adrift from 10 seconds adrift from Rick Hyde. But again in the GT class, Sebastian Rodriguez is coming under pressure from Alexis Clapano. Clapano would be looking to try and make some sort of overtaking move at some point. These two drivers have had a really brilliant battle in the last race, but the battle was prematurely ended early as Sebastian Rodriguez had an incident with a back marker, thus causing him to lose the lead of the GT class. Marco Antonio Rodriguez has moved himself back up the field even further. He's now sitting in 6th after having an incident in the first lap. So this is going to be a bit of a troubling start for the championship leader, as he doesn't want to try and make any mistakes. And as I say, Alexis Clapano has spun the Ambu Racing Aston Martin, and he nearly takes Andros Alvarez with him as Alvarez tried to move out of the way, and Clapano almost moved into his path. But both drivers seem to have gotten away. Doesn't appear to be any damage to the Ambu Racing BMW, but he will lose a spot because of that. But hopefully, with no damage, he can continue on and push hard. Dean Jose is currently running in a bit further behind, but coming under pressure from Kelvin Wong. Kelvin Wong has gone quite wide after trying to overtake Dean Jose. Kelvin Wong must have made a pit stop, made at least a pit stop or some sort, or dropped back down. So he's going to have to regain his composure to try and take another couple of spots from the GTs. But it's absolutely going off between these drivers, as the driver of the opening laps has to be Mohammed Azkar, who has started from the back of the grid to now running well high into the GT class, running currently 5th place in class. So that's a really good start for Mohammed Azkar. But a battle has started to form between Christian DeQ and Jalul, as Jalul is looking to move himself further back up the field after having issues on the opening lap, which is an absolute shame for him because he does have a lot of good pace in that car. As we see Don Napa and Quinton Plain already a lap down, and Kelvin Wong's in the pits as well. He must have some sort of issue or some sort. This could be his first pit stop or some sort for this race. But Jose Barrenca currently has extended the gap to 10 seconds for the GT for the prototype and overall lead. So this is going to help him quite a bit, having quite a bit of momentum coming out from the last round. But Edmund Wong's currently sitting in second in the Hong Kong Sim Racing Orange Eureka. This will be a good result for Edmund Wong, who's currently running in the... he is actually running... He's currently running 6th in the championship on 16 points, so he could have a potential place on getting some more points today to improve his chances in the championship with the 0-1 Hong Kong Sim Racing Eureka. But Daryl Brady has dropped a fair way back now, trying to go for more of a conservative run, knowing the track has dried. So the drivers who have started out on slick tyres, on wet tyres I mean, may have to pit for the slicks as the track is now dried out. Hopefully the rain will stay away for the rest of this race, but from what I've been told, who have started, as Jose Barringa is already going through lap traffic at the moment, already taking lapping Chris Payne. He'll be looking to do the same thing to Gu J Carr, but he goes a little bit wide. The Ferrari tried to go to the left, but the prototype was already going to the left, so that only just cost him barely a few seconds. But for Edmund Wong, he'll be coming across the GT traffic quite soon as well. With such a chaotic start to this race, we've seen quite a few position changes, with Marco Antonio Rodriguez now back up into 6th place and now challenging Rick Scott potentially for 6th place in the prototype class after having a massive spin on the first lap, which took him and several drivers with him. None of these drivers seem to have damage, so they've all managed to continue going on. But it appears that the setup seems to be in more favour of Rodriguez, as he looks to be catching up to Rick Scott. Hopefully the Spanish World of Sim Race team could potentially go for another 1-2 in this race. From what it appears that Aaron Taruna hasn't started this race, so this is going to affect his championship, as Kelvin Wong is still in the pit lane. He must have incurred some sort of damage in the opening laps of this race, but from what I've been getting told, I was wondering where Aaron Taruna was from the Vortex Sim Sports team, but it appears he hasn't started the race, so he may not be able to start this at all, which will affect his championship quite dearly, with being 6 points behind Marco Antonio Rodriguez and Eduardo Del Rinco in the championship. This could play into their favour still, as Marco Antonio Rodriguez is currently running in 6th place and about to challenge Rick Scott for 5th place. So with Aaron Taruna not going to get any Aaron Taruna and Fahid Ghafour not going to score points for the 2nd time this season, this will put doubt into their championship. Hopefully not, but Rick Scott is coming under a lot more pressure now from Marco Antonio Rodriguez. He's want to try to get past. He looks to be doing it on the straight line. He does have the straight line speed, but it comes down to who's got the braking power into the first corner. Rodriguez has the inside advantage, but the two are trading places. Rodriguez will take 5th place from Rick Scott, so Marco Antonio Rodriguez will move up another spot into 5th place, which will still keep himself into a good position for the championship. It looks like on my timing screens a driver is off the track. For some weird reason, Gu J Carr is glitching a little bit. We're not too sure. We'll get some more information on that as it comes to hand. But Mohamed Askar is now challenging David Hoyo for a place for 3rd place in the GT class. For the Mohamed Askar having the best start of anyone in this race, moving up several spots, as he looks to be challenging David Hoyo in the first corner. Mohamed Askar is going to be looking to have a good exit from if he has any chance to overtake Hoyo in the next corner, as they look to be coming under a bit more pressure. There is a prototype approaching David Hoyo and Mohamed Askar. We're not too sure which prototype it was, but I think it could be the orange one of Edmund Wong. It appears, yes, it is Edmund Wong trying to catch the two GT drivers. This could play an advantage of both Ascar and Hoyo, but Ascar seems to have lost a little bit of time letting the prototype go through, which is a smart decision in the short run, but he could lose quite a bit of time. The BMW David Hoyo is trying to go through the racing line, but Edmund Wong has he has managed to take position, to lap the BMW David Hoyo, but it depends on how that all went. But I believe Ascar didn't lose as much time as I originally predicted, so he's going to be challenging David Hoyo on the start-finish straight, which is quite a long straight, not quite long. So hopefully he will get the slipstream coming into the final kink as they come past the start-finish line to start lap 10. Or lap 9, my mistake. But it doesn't appear that Ascar managed to get the job done just this time. But there are still several corners on this circuit where he has an opportunity to overtake, such as potentially turn 3 if he has a really good run. Turn 4 is another decent corner to try and overtake someone, as is 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. Which there's so many corners on this circuit that has the potential for overtaking, but Jose Barringa has opened up the gap even further to 16 seconds, as neither the top 5 have made their pit stop yet, or top 6 have made a pit stop thus far. But it appears Sebastian Rodriguez is the only driver still yet to go a lap down on the overall leader, but that doesn't seem to matter as the GTs are running their own race, with Sebastian Rodriguez still in the GT lead and has slightly opened up a gap even further over Alexis Clapano. Clapano maybe have made another mistake throughout the race. These two were battling earlier for position, but it appears that battle has now ceased for the time being. Andros Alvarez has retaken third in the class, but it appears there may have been some sort of issue between those drivers. But David Hoyo has moved up. As we moved away from another driver, it appears that Mohamed Ascar must have had some sort of issue. He's now dropped further back down from David Hoyo, who was challenging for 4th or 5th position in the GT class. But it appears with Goog J Car, the issue he was having earlier appears to have ceased, so he looks to be looking fine on the TV monitors at the moment. But he will be coming under pressure from Jalul very shortly, and Chris Payne is not too far behind him as well. As I say that, Chris Payne has spun and he looks to have taken out Rick Scott, but I don't think Rick Scott has spun himself, which is a good thing for him. But Chris Payne is in the wall at turn 2. He has got the car in reverse, and he looks to be getting away again. There's an absolute shame, but he's got to watch out as he has Don Napa coming in. Don Napa gets past him with ease. Not too much of a problem. Chris Payne gets underway once again, making a very small mistake in the second corner. But hopefully he hasn't incurred any damage and may be able to just continue on. All the prototype drivers are now battling through GT traffic now as we are 17 minutes into this race, with Jose Barringa still leading, having barely challenged at the opening couple of laps and opening up a very big lead. Edmund Wong currently sits in 2nd place, moving up a couple of spots from his original starting position, having taken advantage of the issue with Marco Antonio Rodriguez, who has moved himself back up into 4th place after having a spin on the 2nd corner and taking out Gu J Car and Jalul. Those two drivers were just innocent bystanders in that incident and had nowhere to go. But it seems to have worked out for most of the drivers, as Antonio Rodriguez will most likely be trying to push hard to catch up to Dale Brady, who is a bit of 20 or 24 seconds or so down the road. But as this is a long 2.4 hour race, we're only 18 minutes in, so none of the leading cars have yet to make a pit stop yet. but we're not expecting a pit stop for quite a little bit of time, as these drivers want to probably push for as long as they can in case rain does come back. Then they will be able to make their first pit stops to change to wets. It does appear that Alexis Clepano has dropped quite a bit fair way back from the GT class leader Sebastian Rodriguez, who looks to be sitting quite comfortably in the lead, and it appears someone has spun on the first corner right behind. It looks to be Quinton Plain, who is, I just saw it just off the corner of the camera as we were looking at Sebastian Rodriguez. But Quinton Plain has spun off. He's currently running in 19th place overall and 2 laps down, but he managed to avoid the wall and continue on. Jose Baringa has still opened up quite a bit of a lead. So far in this race, he's managed to do some consistent 124s, 125s compared to Edmund Wong's 126s. So he has that lap time advantage consistency over the other prototype drivers. Dale Brady's been consistently doing 1 minute 27s, which still is a little bit off the pace from Edmund Wong. But as this race progresses, when the pit stops do come into play, it may be come back into Dale Brady's favour in terms of what strategy he's doing. But Antonio Rodriguez is, after having a couple of bad starts to the race, he has got himself back into the 1 minute 26's range, so his pace is far better than Edmund Wong and Daryl Brady. So I don't see too much of a problem for Marco Antonio Rodriguez to catch up to both Daryl Brady and Edmund Wong and potentially regain that second place that he lost at the start of the race, making a mistake all on his own and taking out 2 GT drivers at the start of the race. We do see Rick Hyde still in 5th place, as behind him is Rick Scott, who's not too far behind, about 6 or so seconds off Rick Hyde, but Rick Hyde's pace has been about 1 minute 28, 29s, 30s, but I'd say roughly the 28 mark he's been more consistent at. So his pace is looking pretty decent at the moment, as is Rick Scott's with an average of 127s. So he's got some really good pace out of him. He just needs to knuckle down, as Mark Robertson is in the pit lane already. He could be repairing the car that he may have incurred some damage at the start of the race. But we'll have to wait and see how long he's been in the pit lane to determine if he's in there to repair the damage, or is he preparing to have an early pit stop. Still out in front of the GT classes, Sebastian Rodriguez has had a near flawless start to this race, having the advantage of Sebastian being Brazilian himself. He knows the circuit quite well. Having a bit of bad luck at the last round at Suzuka, he's going to be looking to get himself into a better position for a potential race win. But he's been consistently going really strong with 1 minute 32s and 1 minute 33s. So I expect his pace to be very consistent all throughout the whole race. His fellow competitor Alexis Clepano has closed the gap slightly, but he's still got a fair bit of work ahead of him, having consistently doing 1 minute 33s and a couple of 1 minute 32s. His pace is almost the same as Sebastian Rodriguez, but Clepano will be looking to push even harder to make up for those mistakes he's made earlier on in the race. Andres Alvarez is currently in 3rd place in the GT class, and he's been doing pretty consistently himself with 1 minute 33s and 34s. Slightly a bit off the pace from the other 2 drivers, but he's still in with a chance, having stayed out of trouble in the opening laps to put himself in a really good position. Hopefully he can keep that momentum up for the rest of the race. Dean Jose, currently riding around in the number 17 Porsche, his consistency's been around the 1 minute 34s. For the last several laps, he's been doing 1 minute 34s, including a 1 minute 33.9. So his pace is very, very consistent with his pace in the race. David Hoyo is the next driver up, consistently doing 1 minute 35s, 1 minute 36s, a little bit further off the pace from the leading GTs, but he's still hanging in there quite strongly. Hopefully, if the other drivers, well, not hopefully, but if an incident were to occur for the drivers up in front, he could be able to put himself into a position to move up several places. Mohammed Asghar is in 12th place, 2 laps down off the race leader, but he's been a little bit less consistent with 1 minute 36s, 1 minute 35s, and a few issues here and there with on lap 10 with 1 minute 46, where I believe he must have had some sort of incident where he's got off the track at some point. But he's seemed to have got himself back into consistency. But he will be coming under pressure from Jalul, who's a man on a mission at the moment, but still doing the 1 minute 34 is the last, and 1 minute 33 just now, 0.3. So his pace is looking really strong. He wants to regain all those positions he lost in the opening lap. He will be going under pressure very shortly, but I believe he may actually be a bit further off the pace than I first before. No, Jalul is gaining more ground over Mohammed Asghar, so he's going to be looking to take 12th place overall in the overall. Gujay Kar sitting in 14th place, being another one of the 3 drivers involved in the incident on the second corner. He did have issues earlier on in the race where he was a bit lag jumping, but it appears he may have stabilised himself a bit more and is able to continue on. But that incident of the first lap was something that he did not want to have, as his pace has been pretty consistent for the race so far with 1 minute 35s. So he's going to just keep it pushing around the circuit for the entirety of the race, and hopefully he can move up several more spots. Christian Deque has been doing a consistent 1 minute 38, 1 minute 37, including a very fast 1 minute 35 on lap 4 of the race, but his consistencies are going down a little, but that's where the tyres have started to heat themselves up a bit, and the wear is starting to get to Deque. But Don Napa is not too far behind Christian Deque, who could be soon in a chance to battle for 15th place overall. But Chris Payne is running in 17th place with the consistencies of 1 minute 36, so he's not the slowest driver in the field so far. But I do see his consistency is a lot better than the drivers doing 1 minute 35s and 1 minute 36s consistently, except with the exception of a couple of laps where he's had a couple of incidences like going wide and even that spin earlier on. But he has a fast time of 1 minute 34.7, so he does have the hot lap pace of the upper field, but hopefully he can put himself in a better position as the race progresses. Kelvin Wong, having issues at the start of the race, he's now running himself in 18th place overall, but he looks to be trying to unlap himself from what appears to be Daryl Brady, and Chris Payne is moving out of the way respectfully to allow the prototypes to go through. But the battle is on, as Kelvin Wong, now 2 laps down off the race leader, will be looking to regain those laps he lost earlier in the race. But he will have the disadvantage because once he does overtake Daryl Brady, he could be put with a blue flag. But as it appears that Don Napa has moved right out of the way, and Kelvin Wong will now move up into 16th place, but he's going to be well off the pace, having issues earlier on in the race. But is now doing consistent 1 minute 35s, which is good pace, but it's almost similar to the times of Chris Payne. So his pace is not looking really good as he makes a very risky move into the first turn, trying to lap Christian Deque, or actually take the position from Christian Deque. But Kelvin Wong's not had a really good start. He's had several issues where he's had makes a couple of trips to the pit lane. He goes quite a bit wide. He's got to be careful about not going too wide too often. where he could be in a position to potentially get a penalty if he continues to go wide. Mark Robertson's back out on track. It does appear a car has gone wide as I was watching Mark Robertson, but I'm not too sure which driver that was. But Mark Robertson's back out on track, having it appears he did lose his front bumper at the start of the race. So he was probably the worst aware of the 3 drivers involved in that first lap incident that also involved Marco Antonio Rodriguez and Gujay Carr. But Mark Robertson's still out on the track and pumping away those laps. Hopefully he can regain that pace. But out in front, Jose Barringa has extended his gap to now 22 seconds over Edmund Wong. So Jose Barringa's pace does appear to be really strong with the 1 minute 25s, but this could come into play later on, as he will most likely have to make a pit stop, 1 or 2 pit stops throughout this race if his pace is good enough and he keep those tyres consistent. But all the field does appear to have spread themselves out now, and it appears that I think and Marco Antonio Rodriguez has closed the gap to now 1 second over Brady. These 2 drivers will be battling it out for 3rd place, but they still do have to deal with the traffic, as Daryl Brady has passed the Ferrari Gujay Carr, but Gujay Carr has respectfully moved out of the way, allowing these prototypes to go through, as he doesn't want to disturb their race. But it is going to be a strong battle between these 2 drivers very shortly, as Marco Antonio Rodriguez's pace is slightly better than Daryl Brady's, as Daryl Brady will be most likely trying to look in his mirror to see where where Marco Antonio Rodriguez is. He does go a bit wide. Daryl Brady gets the car quite a bit loose. He will move to the left of the circuit, which will allow Marco Antonio Rodriguez to move up into 3rd place. Having issues at the start of the race, he is now back up into 3rd place after having taking advantage of the incident where Daryl Brady had lost the car at the final corner. He did coincide 3rd place to Marco Rodriguez, which is Rodriguez's pace has been strong for several laps after his pit stop on lap 1 for, well, not pit stop, he had an incident on the 1st lap. But overall, it appears that the whole field has calmed themselves down to quite a bit. Several gaps have been forming, but we will see that some of these gaps close as the pit stops will start to come into play at some point in this race. But it appears that Kelvin Wong has lost the car quite a bit, trying to overtake Daryl Brady to regain a lap over him, but he did seem to look like he did get loose quite a bit, but has managed to get himself going again. But the battle is still on now. It's now turning into a freeway battle between David Hoy, Mohamed Asghar and Jalul, as these 3 drivers will be battling it out for 11th place overall and 5th place in the GT class. Jalul having issues at the start of the race is looking to make a move on the start-finish straight as they look to start their 20th lap of the race. But Jalul gets the job done into the turn 1. Now with Asghar trying to gain back that position, his pace will be strong, but Asghar does get the car a bit loose as they come in under pressure from the prototype, which I believe could be Marco Antonio Rodriguez. He's going to try and get around all 3 GT drivers. But David Hoy still remains in 14th place. He almost had a look at where that his teammate is, but they may be teammates. But Jalul looks to have taken 11th place in the GT class, but David Hoy's got the inside line, so he's going to be protecting that inside line. Jalul is involving, and Kelvin Wong looks to have spun himself once again, having got himself caught up in that incident between the 3 GT drivers, which is an absolute shame. It doesn't seem to be a good day for Kelvin Wong, who has to now recover, and he's going to get himself back running again. He's not having the best of days, Kelvin Wong, but hopefully he can be able to work back up once again. But David Hoyo it has retained 11th position as the freeway battle continues between himself, Jalul and Azkar. These three drivers will be looking to push hard to improve their positions, but Kelvin Wong is looking to... Kelvin Wong will be passing these GT drivers pole position, but quite surely, as he is on the same lap as these GT drivers. But David Hoyo has defended the 11th spot once again, as Kelvin Wong looks to be getting slightly angry as he has to battle with these GT drivers being in a position he doesn't want to be in. He goes quite wide trying to overtake these guys, but he doesn't get the job done. But he will get the job done at this next corner. As he does, he gets around gets around Hoyo, and he will now move. Kelvin Wong will now move himself further up the field, but the pace has not been good for Kelvin Wong in the last couple of laps. But the battle seems to be still intensifying between Hoyo, Jalul, and Azkar. As Azkar has a look on the inside, Azkar looks to have gotten the job done, which is a good effort from Azkar, who did start from the back of the grid of today's race. But now he will be setting his sights on Hoyo, but he will still have to continue looking to his mirror to see that Jalul is still there, as he wants to move himself up several positions as well. We're now 35 minutes into this race. It's been an absolute mad start. If you're just joining us now, we have 20 drivers currently racing in 2 different classes. But Jose Barringa still out in front by 21 seconds over Edmund Wong. After having a near flawless start to the race, having stayed out of trouble, he's now currently in the lead on about to start his 25th lap. His pace has been very strong all day so far. Edmund Wong currently in second place overall, 21.2 seconds adrift from Jose Barringa, but hopefully pit stop strategy may work in Edmund Wong's favour, and he could potentially catch up to Barringa when the pit stops start to occur with these prototypes. Championship leader Marco Antonio Rodriguez is now up into third place, having a very terrible start, having lost the control of the car, maybe potentially with some contact with another driver, but end up collecting 2 other GT cars and end up at the back of the grid, or the back of the pack, but has now moved himself back up into third place, 51 seconds adrift, but he will be looking to hunt down Edmund Wong for second place overall. Daryl Brady is currently sitting in 4th place, having a really good start, but has managed to coincide second place to Edmund Wong, and then later on to third place to Marco Antonio Rodriguez. But he's currently sitting 1 minute and 3 seconds behind the race leader. Not far behind is Rick Hyde, another 13 or so seconds behind Brady. But Rick Hyde has seemed to have kept himself out of trouble in the opening stages of this race, and currently sitting in 5th place in the prototype and overall standings, who is followed by Rick Scott in the Ligier. It appears he may have some sort of issue with his livery, either that or that's a new livery from him. But it does look nice with the car. Sebastian Rodriguez still retains the GT class lead, having a near flawless start as well at the start of the race. He currently leads the GTE class, followed by Alexis Clepano. Clepano had a couple of opportunities earlier on in the race, as Christian Deque has now rolled himself into pit lane, maybe having his first stop of the race, but most likely, as he was pushing quite hard, but he may have run his tyres out. But Alexis Clepano currently sits second in the GT class. He won't be joined by his teammate Luis Morano for this event, as Morano has business to attend to of some sort. But currently in third place in the GT class, we have the first of the Spanish entered World of Sim Sports BMWs, but Rick Heidel also appears to be making a pit stop. Rick Heidel is in the pit lane at the moment, making his first pit stop of the race. Who just been lapped by Jose Berenga just a short time ago. So Berenga will now have lapped the all but 2 cars in this race thus far, but no, all but 4 cars, my mistake. But with the pace that Berenga has, it probably won't be long till he overlaps Darryl Brady as well, because Berenga's pace has been quite strong so far in this race. But it appears that it is nice and dry out on the circuit, so the drivers are going to be pushing really hard in case it does start to rain once again in this race. But back in GT, we have Andros Alvarez, the first of the BMW World of Sim Sport team BMWs. With this team, which is the all Spanish team, have cars in both the prototype and GT class in this race. So they're a very well represented team, and their pace has been quite strong, especially with Berenga and Marco Antonio Rodriguez currently on 1st and 3rd respectively in the prototype class. But Andros Alvarez is currently sitting 3rd in the GT class, as his other teammate, I believe his other teammate is in the race, David Hoyo, is currently sitting in 12th overall, and now coming under pressure from ASCAR. It appears that Jalul has may have made some sort of mistake earlier. He's now dropped back down to 14th place, but all 3 drivers are still battling it out for 12th place overall between Hoyo, ASCAR and Jalul. This battle, every time I think it seems to be over, I go to focus on another driver. These 3 drivers somehow catch up to each other once again and continued the battle, which has been raging from the start of this for the last 5 or so laps in this race. All for 12th position, and for about 5th place in the GT class. These drivers, especially ASCAR and Jalul, they'll be wanting to get as many points as they are, as Jalul and ASCAR are slightly a bit behind in the championship points wise, as David Hoyo is a bit further down the standings, but with 3 points with his teammate Miguel Angel Piqueras. But Mohamed ASCAR and Jalul want to improve their points a bit more, as they are far behind in terms of the points, with Luis Morano and Alexis Clapano having won all 3 races thus far this season. It appears that Darryl Brady may be out of this race. He must have had some sort of issue at... Yeah, Darryl Brady is now, it looks to be out of this race for now. I'm not too sure what happened with him, but he looks to be in the pit, in his pit box with a DNF next to his name. So we're not too sure what's happened with him. Hopefully we can get some information on that very shortly. But if that's the case, that could be the first retirement of today's race. Only 42 minutes into this race, we've still got 100 or so minutes left to go until the end of the race. But once again, Jose Berenga has opened up that gap over Edmund Wong in the overall standings by 25.7 seconds. Berenga's pace has been very strong all race, having really consistent 1 minute 25s, 1:26s, but his pace is dropping off a little bit as he has to deal with lap traffic, but it is still very strong. Back down in 12th place, David Hoyo is still under pressure from ASCAR and Jalul. These 3 have been battling very strong over the last 5, maybe probably half an hour. These 3 have been battling, as we are 42 minutes into this race, and they are going to be battling strong like it did the last lap of the race. But they're going to still. None of these drivers appears to have made a pit stop in this race so far. But I do expect the pit stops to start occurring with these GTs, probably at the top of the hour or so, depending on the pace. But we will try and check back at these guys later on and see how how they go, but I will try. Now the battle is still on. The battle is still on between these three drivers: David Hoyo, Mohammed Azkar, and Jalil. But Jalil's fallen back a little bit, but he most likely will try and push up and close the gap between Mohammed Azkar and David Hoyo. But it appears to have settled down slightly a bit more with these drivers, as Kelvin Wong will now move up into 9th place in overall, having a couple of bad issues over the course of this race. He will now be he's just overtaken Andros Alvarez, currently sitting 3rd place in the GT class for 9th overall. But I'm not too sure what's the problem with Daryl Brady, but he could be out of this race. He's been out in the pit lane for the last 2 or so laps thus far. But still out in front, Jose Berenga still maintains that lead of the race. Edmund Wong currently sitting in 2nd place, 25 seconds adrift, followed by Marco Antonio Rodriguez, who appears to be closing the gap even further over Edmund Wong. In 4th place we have Rick Scott in the Ligier JSP2, battling pretty strong despite being 1 lap down over the race leader, but he is a lap ahead of his competitor Rick Hyde, who currently sits in 5th place in the prototype and overall standings. And the last of the running, the second last of the running prototypes still out in front. We have about 6 or so prototypes still running in the race today. As Daryl Brady is in the pit lane, we're not too sure what has happened with him. I will try and get some information as it comes to hand, but for now he is dropping further down the timesheets and maybe just out of this race for today, which is an absolute shame for Daryl Brady. He had a really good start and was up into 2nd in the early stages of the race, but hopefully we'll see him in the next round, and hopefully he can continue the good pace he had at the start of this race. Still out in front is Jose Berenga in the Marco Rodriguez is making his first pit stop of the race so far. Now putting himself now a lap down over the race leader. Appears Rick Scott also had managed to get well, not managed. He also sadly has been lapped as well. So it's only Edmund Wong left, the only driver on the lead lap of Jose Berenga. But hopefully Marco Antonio Rodriguez will regain that lap after the pit stop cycles continue. But it appears to be starting to rain on the circuit here. Maybe Marco Antonio Rodriguez has maybe made a jump into the pit lane for wet tyres, but it does appear to be raining on the circuit at the moment. It is. I can confirm it is raining out on the circuit. Maybe the drivers are still out on the slicks. They may have to pit at some point, but it's still saying the temperature is still 25 degrees. But I am getting wet being flashed on my screen saying it is starting to rain, so the rain has now come back to the circuit. This will play a major role now, as the drivers will soon have to be forcing themselves to pit for wet tyres, as Marco Antonio Rodriguez comes back out onto the circuit in 4th place. but he may have made a really smart call just now, having to put himself straight onto the wet tyres, as it doesn't appear any other driver has stopped for. David Hoyer is now in the pit lane. He is now he lost a couple of positions to Mohamed Asghar and Jalil, who's also moved up several positions themselves. But the race leader Jose Barrenco has now entered the pit lane. He will be looking to switch to the wet tyres. It is now starting to rain out on the circuit. He will be joined by David Hoyer, who's still continuously moving down the timesheets, but he is making the right smart. He's potentially rolling the dice here. Now Edmund Wong will now take the lead of the race, possibly still staying out on the slick tyres. He does look to be slipping the car a little bit, but the race is in its early stages. But it could be not long till the track gets wet and slippery for the drivers. But I am getting confirmation that Daryl Brady is possibly out of this race. Not too sure the exact reason why, but he has gone into the pit lane to potentially do a pit stop, and has just retired. So I can confirm for the time being that Daryl Brady is out of this race, the first retirement of the race. But as Jalil gets ahead of Asghar gets a bit loose. He must have stayed out too long on those slick tyres and must have got it wrong on the first corner. That'll put Jalil up into 5th place in the GT class, having issues at the start of the race. David Hoyer, who was ahead of Asghar and Jalil with that freeway battle, is now down in the 17th spot, still sitting in the pit lane. He could be doing a full pit stop with fuel and tyres, as it is now raining. But Jose Barrenco is now back out on the track. Now 57 seconds or so adrift of Edmund Wong, but Edmund Wong will have to pit at some point. It is now raining out on the circuit. And I again confirmed that it is rain, like the race director has confirmed it is now raining. So the drivers, it won't be long till the drivers will have to make a pit stop for wet tyres, because they can't stay out for too long in the wet. But for some reason, it looks like it's raining on some monitors, on some cameras, but it appears to be not raining on others. But I can confirm it is raining. So this will throw a wrench in the works between these drivers, as Edmund Wong, the race leader, gets the car a little bit loose. He is still out on the slick tyres in the rain, so he will have to pit possibly in the next couple of laps or so. Otherwise, if it gets too wet, it may become undrivable for any car to drive around. And there appears to be an incident on the circuit. I'm not too sure what's happened there. It looks to be between Quinton Plain and one of the Spanish team drivers. It is David Hoyer. Quinton Plain has had a coming together. David Hoyer just now. Not too sure what happened. Maybe these two they are a lap apart each, but the two must have had a coming together in what appears to be turn 14, maybe. Not too sure what part of the circuit that was, but Quinton Plain is now on the start-finish straight, so I assume it could be turn 13. That's a bit of sad news for Quinton Plain, who has been keeping it nice and consistent in the opening stage, first 52 minutes of this race. But Dean Jose has now entered the pit lane. He will also be joined by Mark Robertson. Both drivers looks to be pitting for wet tyres, as the track is now starting to become undrivable for several of the drivers. But Edmund Wong still out in front at the time, now having a 1 minute and 4 second gap over Jose Barrenco. I think Edmund Wong may still be on the slick tyres, but he's still finding quite a bit of grip out on the circuit. But there's only so much grip that he can find, and so much rain that will come down that will stop him from taking advantage. But Jose Barrenco has already made his pit stop for wet tyres, so he's pretty well set in terms of not making a pit stop for a little while. But Edmund Wong will have to pit at some point for those wet tyres. But we are entering the nighttime hours of this race. This is the part of the race where it will get dark, and this will add an even bigger challenge to the drivers, as it appears that another driver has gone off the track. It looks to be David Napa, and he was also, I believe, he's collected Ascar as well. He must have had a coming together with Muhammad Ascar, who was battling with Jalul just moments ago. Ascar and Don Napa have had a coming together. Napa a lap or so down over Ascar. Ascar will lose several places as Dean Jose and Quinton Plain are also in the pit lane for wet tyres. They can't afford to stay out for too long on those slick tyres. But Edmund Wong is still out on the circuit. Once again, it is now, it's raining quite heavily now. But I'm not too sure what happened between Ascar and Don Napa. But as Alexis Claparo has gone off the track a little bit, and it appears that Kelvin Wong is retired as well. Not too sure what's happened with him. He was running in 7th position, having several issues over the course of this race, but it appears he may also be out of this race as well. That'll most likely be the second retirement of this race out of 20 starters. We only have 18 left running for the time being, with Dean Jose just coming out of the pit lane now after making his pit stop for potentially wet tyres and more fuel to keep him going for a while. Quinton Plain's still sitting in the pit lane, probably doing a pit stop, but he's gone moving again. So he's going to come back out, potentially in 15th place or so. Yes, he might. I know Don Napa has moved up another place into 15th place, as Jared van der Waai has now taken over the Corvette, that beautifully black in orange Corvette, as it's now fully dark on the circuit, and Edwin Wong is now in the pit lane as well as Alexis Clapano. Both drivers who are second in the race. Kelvin Wong appears to have rejoined the race. He must have had some sort of issue with his connection, but he will be back out on the circuit. It's saying he has rejoined the race. But now Edmund Wong is now, and Alexis Clapano are in the pit lane. Jalul has taken advantage and moved up into 4th place in the GT class, having that really strong battle. Kelvin Wong is now coming back out on the circuit. So he must have had some sort of issue, but it's now down to Edmund Wong, as Jose Berenga already retakes the lead. It was 50-something seconds prior to the pit stop, but Chris Payne is also taking himself into the pit lane, but Berenga's strategy of pitting early for the rain tyres has worked to his advantage. He regains the lead of the race. Edmund Wong is now coming back out on circuit, still in 2nd place after the pit stop cycle. Rick Scott has now got himself back onto the lead lap, as does Marco Antonio Rodriguez. Rodriguez was one of the first drivers to blink in terms of running on wets, as Marco Rodriguez is trying to get around Gujay Carr's Ferrari, there appears to be a BMW on the circuit. Andrew Alvarez currently sitting in 2nd in the GT class. He has spun the car, and he could soon be coming under pressure from Jalul. I don't think Alvarez has pitted as well as Rodriguez for wet tyres. It still appears to be raining out on the circuit. But that's an absolute disaster for Alvarez, who was running so strong in the early stages of this race. But he could still get himself back onto the pace, as there appears to be some sort of a bit of a gap, a 1-lap gap, mind you, over Alvarez and Jalul. So Jalul's got a bit of work ahead of him if he wants to regain that lap. We still have about 90 or so minutes left in this race, so an hour and a half. We are currently nearly an hour into this race so far, and Jose Berenga still leads after the first pit stop cycle, but the gap is now 19 seconds to Edmund Wong, who Edmund Wong tried to stay out as long as he could, but it appears to be a BMW spun again. I think it could be Alvarez has spun the car once again, trying to stay out as long as is possible on the slick tyres. Maybe he's betting on the rain going away a lot sooner than everyone reckons. But he does seem to be going quite a bit wide. He may have occurred to a little bit of damage. His pace is a little bit off, but that'll give Sebastian Rodriguez the gap he needs to calm himself a lot down. He wants to keep that consistency, but he doesn't want to have that pressure. But with issues with Alvarez and possibly Topano slowly ever so catching up to Alvarez, this gives Sebastian Rodriguez the chance to extend that gap in the GT class. But it appears Jalul is sitting in 4th place in the class, but Chris Payne he did make his pit stop, but he's back in the pit lane again for a reason. He looks to be changing tyres. Kelvin Wong is also coming in the pit lane. He looks to have some damage. He must have collided with another vehicle at some point. We must have missed that. Well, I must have missed that. But it appears he has substantial damage to the front of his vehicle, of his Aurica, as Alejandro Alvarez comes into the pit lane himself, getting himself back in and realizing that he may not be able to stay out on those slick tyres. He's reversing in the pit lane. He must have. The track is so slippery that it is always possible to miss his pit stop. He's moving forward and backwards. Kelvin Wong is saying that someone has crashed into him. Not too sure what's happened, but he has sustained quite a heavy damage. He will lose several more spots. He's now currently sitting in 14th place overall, 4 laps away from the race leader. But Alvarez having a troubling couple of laps. He's now moved down 3 spots or so from the Sebastian Rodriguez or so. But he's still potentially on the same lap as the GT leader. But I don't think Jalul, Ascar, Clapano, Rodriguez have made pit stops themselves yet for the wet tyres. So they're going to be trying to put a bit of a gamble out to stay out as long as possible on those slick tyres. But it does appear to be slightly in the darkness. A dry racing line has seemed to be formed, so I think it may have stopped raining. And the information I'm getting is that Kelvin hit it was a collision between Alvarez and Kelvin Wong, which sustained the damage to his Aurica. But Kelvin Wong is back out on the circuit. That is the information I'm getting, that Alvarez and Kelvin Wong have had a coming together at some point in the circuit. It is quite dark. There is not much visibility. So it's easy for the drivers to get confused, as Rick Scott, in 3rd place in the overall class, is now in the pit lane making his pit stop. I'm not too sure if it's his first pit stop, but I actually, come to think of it, I don't think any driver has made a pit stop for wets, because the racing line has formed. And Marco Antonio Rodriguez has got himself around one of the Aston Martins and taken 3rd place in overall once again. But I think maybe none of my original idea, or that my original thought that the drivers are pitting for wets may have been slightly wrong, because Chris Payne once again enters the pit lane 6 laps down. He must be having some sort of issue with the vehicle, as this could be his 4th or 5th stop of the race thus far. Rick Scott's still in the pit lane making his general pit stop with 62 minutes completed so far in this race. But Rick Scott looks to be getting away once again, back out onto the circuit. Goes a bit wide and hits I think he hit the pit wall on the way out, as Don Napa himself is also entering the pit lane for his scheduled pit stop. His pit stall is right at the entry to pit lane, so as soon as he's in, he's able to do his pit stop. But he still has a long way to go pit road and to get himself back out. But the gap has extended to 18 seconds now between Jose Berenga leading the prototype and overall class. over Edmund Wong. 18.5 is the gap, while Antonio Rodriguez is 1 minute 13 seconds behind Jose Barringa. The championship leader is now back up into third place, having issues at the start of this race, which is good to see from Marco Antonio Rodriguez. But after having issues on the very first lap, colliding with two other GT cars, and now he's still only 1 minute and 12 seconds behind after the pit stop cycle. In GT, Sebastian Rodriguez appears to have a 1 lap advantage over Alexis Clepanos, currently sitting second in the GT class, followed by Mohamed Asghar, who did have a few issues, as well as the other driver in 4th place, Jalul, who had a very strong battle between himself, Asghar, and David Hoyo. But Hoyo is down in 15th place, having made a stop, and a very lengthy one at that. He's now dropped several positions. He was running third at the in the GT class prior to the pit stop. Behind Jalul is Andros Alvarez, who he was keeping himself nice and quiet, but had a collision with Kelvin Wong just moments ago, forcing both drivers to make their pit stop. Alexis Clepano is now in the pit lane, 64 minutes. I think this could be his first pit stop. I haven't seen him in the pits so far in this race. So 65 minutes for a stint, as Asghar will move up a spot into second in class. That'll be 1-2 for Porsche. But he'll be doing a full service tyres and fuel. This will give Jalul the advantage as well to move up several more spots. Jalul is slightly out of sync. I think he also made a pit stop earlier in this race, so he'll stay out a bit longer than the other drivers. Andres Alvarez is currently in 10th place. He will be also to be passing Alexis Clepano as well, as Gu J Carr is currently sitting at 11th spot, followed by Dean Jose. Jared van der Weide has taken over the Corvette and now running very strong in 13th place. Kelvin Wong has dropped down to 14th place, having moved up several spots, but having an issue which caused him to, well, technically retire, but then managed to get himself back in. He goes quite wide. He got himself into the wet patch. Even though the racing line is dry, he is on slick tyres, and the track anywhere off the racing line will be still wet, and he did hit a wet patch and quite wide. He's now got himself back onto the racing line. Most of these drivers will be on slick tyres. Even though the racing line is dry, the rest of the track and off the track will be wet, as Jared van der Weide is back in the pit lane in 14th place. David Hoyo is currently sitting in 15th place, followed by Paul Faustino, who has taken over the Falcon Porsche. No, not the Falcon Porsche. He's taken over the number 19 flat 6 RSR, currently sitting at 16th place. Brett Gray has also taken over the Aston Martin. The number is, trying to look at the timings, the number 127 no, that's the wrong one actually, I'm so sorry. That is actually, I was actually mentioning Mark Robertson's car. Not too sure which team he's running with, but he's still running quite strong in 17th place. He will have a lot of work to make up as Gu J Carr entered this pit lane. It appears to have lost his front bumper as well. He must have had a collision with another driver as well. Chris Payne currently running in 18th place, coming out of the pit lane now, 7 laps off the pace of the race leader. So Chris Payne will start his 38th lap compared to Jose Barringa's lap 45. but it appears all the drivers have somewhat spread out right about now. So there's not really much of a battle between many drivers, but that could change once the pit stop cycle starts again later on in the race. But it's still very nice and consistent between most of the drivers. A few incidences here and there, but that's a certainty given how the racetrack is still quite wet off the racing line. But as Chris Payne looks to have gotten into an incident with a prototype driver, I'm not too sure which prototype driver it was. It could be Marco Antonio Rodriguez. He looks to have collided with Chris Payne by the looks of it. Chris Payne stopped out on the track once again. It appears he's out of this race as well. I can confirm it was Marco Antonio Rodriguez. Chris Payne looks to have retired from this race after that collision with Rodriguez, Marco Antonio Rodriguez. That will put him out of this race. That's an absolute shame for Chris Payne. He was trying to keep himself out of trouble for the entirety of this race, but managed to have a couple of incidences. But I believe this one may have just been too severe for his car. I'm not too sure. Andres Alvarez is still sitting in the pit lane, or could have made a pit stop under my nose. I haven't even noticed when he went into the pit lane. But still out in front is Jose Berenga with still out on in the lead is Jose Berenga, followed by Edmund Wong with Marco Antonio Rodriguez, who doesn't seem to have sustained any damage in that incident with Chris Payne, but he will still be looking to continue soldier on. But he, despite only being a minute and 10 seconds behind the race leader, as he goes for a move to lap Gujay Kar. Gujay Kar is running in 15th place so far in this race. The incident just before is a pretty obvious reminder of the difference between these two classes of cars, where the prototype drivers have to be careful of the GT cars, while the GT cars while not only battling for positions in the GT class, but have that quick look in the mirror every so often to see if that prototype's catching up, because those prototypes, especially on a circuit like this, will catch up very quickly, but as they have more aerodynamics to go through the corners much faster. With 71 minutes already done in this race, Jose Berenga still leads the 2.4 hours of Interlagos, followed by Edmund Wong in the number 1 Hong Kong Sim Racing Eureka with 28 seconds adrift of Jose Berenga. In 3rd place, another 30 or so seconds behind, is Marco Antonio Rodriguez, being the last driver on the lead lap, as behind him it appears to be a three-wide battle going on between prototypes and the GTs. Rick Scott currently sits in 4th place in the overall and prototype class in the Ligier JSP2, as he looks to be lapping Jalul once again. In 5th place we have Rick Hyde in the Zytec in the prototype class. He's been having a very quiet race so far, keeping to himself and staying out of trouble, and he's going to put himself in a really good position toward the end of this race. In the GT class, 6th place overall and leading the GT class, we have the hometown driver, Sebastian Rodriguez. He's had a very consistent race thus far, staying out of trouble for the majority of the race. And he has a fair distance ahead of Mohammed Asghar, who currently sits in 7th place overall, and it looks to be entering the pit lane just as I see him. It must be a scheduled pit stop of some sort. But will give Jalil the opportunity to move up another spot as he goes past Askar to take second place in the class as Edmund Wong too enters the pit lane. As does Dean Jose. There could be some sort of issue on the track that is forcing all these, unless they're all making their scheduled pit stops as we speak. Doesn't appear to be any rain of sorts, but the track is still wet. As we did see another driver, not too sure, I think it was Kelvin Wong, as I just saw him a quick second, going a little bit wide once again. And he loses all that grip, being on slick tyres once he hits that water on the circuit. But Alexis Clepano will now also move up spots, so it's Jalil Clepano will take advantage of Askar, currently sitting in the pit lane. Kelvin Wong will gain another lap, but it appears that Edmund Wong has lost a position to Marco Antonio Rodriguez, as Edmund Wong too was in the pit lane. This will now put Rodriguez second place to Berenga, only 58 seconds behind Berenga, which now is a 1-2 for the all-Spanish World of Sim Racing team, as Edmund Wong will now drop down into third place overall in the race. But he has only made another pit stop, so I assume he has put some fuel in the car and some new tyres and got himself back out on the circuit to do another stint. Back in the GT class, Sebastian Rodriguez still maintains the lead, with Jalil now running in second place and also pitting himself. So this will give Clepano and other drivers the opportunity to move up several spots, as Clepano already moves up another spot into second in the class, as he was close behind Jalil, but Jalil has another driver. Jalil has also missed his pit stop. Several drivers have missed their pit stalls in the course of this race, as it is still quite slippery. With not much cars going through pit lane. The pit lane probably still is quite wet, so all the drivers will several drivers have missed their pit stalls throughout the course of this race so far. Kelvin Wong sits in 9th overall, the last of the running prototypes, with 5 laps down over Jose Berenga. But he will be looking to just score points for today's race, but it appears that David Hoyer is also entering the pit lane as well. Kelvin Wong will now move himself up into 8th overall and still 6th in the prototype class. But Jalil himself is also still in the pit lane, but Sebastian Rodriguez himself is also entering the pit lane. He's probably going to be making his pit stop as well, so this is going to be very exciting, as Alexis Clepano has already made a pit stop earlier, or could potentially be on the line to make another pit stop at some point, unless he has already made his pit stop. So it'll be up to Rodriguez to see what strategy he goes. He will most likely be trying to change tyres as Jalil gets back underway and heading back out of the pit lane. As I did see with Jalil exiting the pit lane itself is still quite wet, so it's no surprise that several drivers have missed their pit stops, which has forced them to either reverse back into their pit stall. David Hoyer is still sitting in the pit lane, but he now too gets underway. So Alexis Clepano will now be pushing really hard to bridge the gap between himself and Rodriguez. It appears on the timing screens that Rodriguez is only 3 laps down over the race leader, while Alexis Clepano is only 4 laps down. But I'm not too sure the exact gap between the two drivers, but it could be within less than a lap or so. Kelvin Wong looks to be battling with Jose Berenga to avoid going another lap down, but it appears another driver, as Sebastian Rodriguez himself now comes back out on the racetrack, still in the lead of the GT class, having a very normal pit stop like everyone else. Come out nice, and I was seeing a bit of a battle between Jose Berenga and Kelvin Wong. Kelvin Wong is trying to keep himself from going another lap down, as he is 4 laps down over Jose Berenga. But Berenga is not too far behind Kelvin Wong out on the track. Mohamed Askar still sits in 9th place overall, pushing really strong, 5 laps off the race leader, as is Andros Alvarez Jalul, who's now dropped several positions down. He's now sitting 5th place in class, having made his pit stops, as Jared van der Weide, who took over the Corvette 2 pit stops or so ago, currently sitting in 12th place overall. But in 13th place we have Gu J Carb, having a couple of issues himself over the course of this race. That he will start come under a bit of pressure by appears to be Kelvin Wong, looking to lap the Ferrari once again, as Gu J Car stays out of the way of the prototype. Gene Jose sitting in 14th place in the Falcon Porsche, followed by Paul Flostino, who has taken over from his teammate to complete the rest of this race, because we only are 79 minutes into this 144 minute race. We do see David Hoyo back out on the track in 16th place. He's lost several positions in his last pit stop. He must have filled up the tank to the brim, so he's going to be expecting to have a very long stint in that car and trying to make those tyres last for as long as possible to avoid going back into the pit lane. But he has lost several spots and laps over the GT leader. Still out in front is Jose Baringa in the prototype over Marco Antonio Rodriguez by 38 seconds. The gap looks to be closing, I believe, because Rodriguez's pace over the last 5 or so laps has been 1 minute 27s, 1 minute 28s, but that's because of the conditions of the circuit compared to Jose Baringa's 1 minute 30s. He's in the 1 minute 30 range, so he's trying to keep himself nice and consistent, as he has a fair distance. As I say that, Jose Baringa's back in the pit lane, probably making another pit stop. It looks like he is changing tyres, as it is still the nighttime hours, as that'll give Marco Rodriguez the opportunity to catch up even more. That'll also put Rick Scott back on the lead lap, only 1 minute 45 seconds behind Baringa. Edmund Wong could also be in a position to gain back some time he lost, as Rodriguez, the championship leader, now takes the lead. He goes in the inside line, but he has to deal with his own teammate, which appears to be Alvarez. But he gets away from Alvarez very cleanly, as Jose Baringa now in the pit lane. Edmund Wong will now move up another place. I assume Rick Scott could have an opportunity to catch up even further to Jose Baringa, but this could be his second stop or so in this race. So I expect Marco Antonio Rodriguez, Edmund Wong, Rick Scott to be making another pit stop at some point to even it all out. But Rick Scott looks to be trying to get past Sebastian Rodriguez to outlap him once again. But as Rodriguez's pace is very strong, it could mean that Rodriguez is a lap ahead of Clapana. I'm not too sure about the exact gap between these two drivers, but Rodriguez does seem to have a very comfortable lead, having now started his 51st lap. His pace will be looking quite strong, as we are only 82 minutes into this race. So as several of the drivers are now making their pits, we're going through another pit stop cycle. This will play another role into this race. The other one will be, will it rain again? Because it has rained at the start of the race and just a while ago as well. There was quite a bit of heavy rain about an hour or so into this race, about 20 or so minutes ago. We're not too sure if the rain will come back, but we'll have to wait and see how it all goes. As the race seems to be chilling out quite a bit, I'd like to make a couple of mentions to Gomes for the servers setting up for the series. Jacek Frecek, White Lion, and Chris Payne for putting the series together. Without these guys, we won't all be here today. We also want to thank Bruno Cardoso, Niranjan Kumar, Chris Payne, Jacek Frecek, Mark Robertson, and Chris Osley for kindly donating money to the series to ensure that we have all the equipment we need to keep the series running well and the best that possible. As David Hoyer is once again back in the pit lane now, down in 17th place, last in the running order. He was very high up early in the race, but it appears to be off the pace and having some sort of issues with his BMW. But that's a bit of a disappointment from Hoyer. But hopefully he will get himself back out on the track and keep pushing, because he could still score a couple of points as we are only 84 minutes into this race. With this being the Interlagos 2.4-hour round of Endurance Championship, we only have one round left remaining after this, which is not the typical rounds that you see in the last 4 rounds of the championship so far. It will be a complete 6-hour race to finish off the championship, which will be at Mount Panorama Bathurst for the Bathurst 6 hour. So that's going to be a very long and exciting race to decide the championship, as Rodriguez will be looking to close the gap, even extend his gap for the championship. As the team of Aaron Tarun and Fahid Ghafoor doesn't appear to be racing today, so they're going to lose even more points, as Edmund Wong from what I'm being told, Aaron Taruna has reported he was unable to make the start of this race, which is absolutely sad to see, but these things do kind of happen from time to time, and we do hope that they come back strong for the final round of the season. But the gap is now only down to 18 seconds between Marco Rodriguez and Edwin Wong for the prototype class and overall, as Jose Moringa is now 32 seconds adrift of Rodriguez, so he'll be looking to push really hard to ensure he moves back up several spots to get back into the first place position he was holding for the better half of the race, as he has a little bit of a nibble with one of the Porsches. Appears to be Paul Faustino into the first and second corner, but it seems to have recovered that quite well and will continue on. It was good car control from Moringa and Pole at the same time, both drivers, as they both noticed that both are going for the same piece of real estate. But still, the races seem to have calmed down quite a fair way between all the drivers. All the drivers are now pushing really hard in the dark part of the race, where it's really difficult to see for all these drivers. The only thing they have is a couple of lights, a few lights scattered around the track, and their own car headlights to rely on to see where they're going, and the rear tail lights of the cars that they are approaching or following to keep in the consistency. But it does appear that Sebastian Rodriguez is on the same lap as Alexis Clapano. No, I might be wrong actually, because Sebastian Rodriguez looks to be going through to turn 4. Turn 3 or 4. I think it looks to be turn 4 on the timing screens, and Clapano is only just starting to come onto the start-finish straight. So there's quite a bit of a distance between these two drivers. As this race progresses and the pit stops start to become a bit of more of a hassle, Rodriguez could either extend the lead or lose the lead he has over Alexis Clapano, as he gets lapped by another prototype by looks at Rick Hyde, while Gu J-Car is the GT also sitting alongside. He'll move right out of the way for Rodriguez, which he does do so kindly, as Rodriguez will move through to lap Gu J-Car once again. but Alexis Capano is still pushing really hard despite being fair distance behind, about half a lap or so difference between the two drivers. But with only 88 minutes into this race out of 144 minutes or 2.4 hours, we are going to see the gap potentially close down, as the teams are expecting to do maybe 1 or 2 pit stops to the end of this race, but they're going to be pushing hard, also pushing consistently, as they don't want to push too hard and risk having to go back into the pit lanes to make more pit stops than they would have to. It appears that all the drivers have spread themselves out over the course of this race, and there appears to be large gaps forming, especially in the GT class, with Sebastian Rodriguez having a fair lead over Alexis Capano, where a fair distance separates the two of them. And between Capano and Ascar, there doesn't appear to be much of a large gap between the two, as Ascar is not too far behind Alexis Capano. So if Capano makes any mistakes, Ascar could be right there to breathe down his neck, as Andros Alvarez is also not too far behind Ascar. He's right behind Ascar, so he could be looking to push hard and potentially go for a overtake. This will be a position for a potential podium between these two drivers. Jalil sits a bit further back behind in 5th place in the class, but he's not too far ahead of Jalil, Van der Waal, sorry. There is a bit of a gap between the Jalil and Van der Waal, but pit stops will still continue to play a key role in this race. We have about 54 laps or 54 minutes or so left to go in this race, so we've got less than an hour left until the end of the race, as Marco Antonio Rodriguez still has the lead of the race. Edmund Wong sitting in 2nd place overall in the G prototype class, 18 seconds adrift, while Jose Bringer has closed the gap even further now, down to 30 seconds over the race leader. So his pace is going to be very strong. In the last 5 or so laps, he's been doing a very consistent 1 minute 25s, 1 minute 26s. Still a little bit off the pace that he was at the start of this race, but his fastest lap of the race was a minute 24.4 compared to everyone else's. Jose Barringa still has that pace advantage over the other drivers, as it appears Barringa is about to come across Sebastian Rodriguez once again. Gets past Sebastian Rodriguez with ease, as Rodriguez knows to just move out of the way, as he has a fair lead in the race. But it appears that Alvarez has gone past Ascar once again for 9th place overall in the, and also 3rd place in the GT class. As Alvarez was gaining ground on Ascar, but Ascar is not giving up that position without a big fight. He will take that fight to the first corner. It appears that these two will be fighting it out to the first corner. Ascar looks to be having a bit of a look into the first corner, but Alvarez is just that wee bit too far ahead. But Ascar will try and get a good exit out of the first 2 corners. Hopefully he will be able to, but he doesn't appear to have he has slowed down a bit coming out of the 2nd corner, and Alvarez has opened up a slight bit of a gap between himself and Ascar. But still out in front, Edmund Wong has closed the gap a little bit. He has gained 1 second over Antonio Rodriguez, who must have lost a little bit of time, possibly by the looks of it, trying to overtake Jalil. But that's one of the things about the GT cars, where the GT cars are trying to run their own race, and by the regulations, the GT cars do technically have first preference in terms of what racing line to take around the corners. Most GT drivers will just easily move out of the way and let the prototypes go, as there's no point trying to hold up the prototypes, as they're running their own different race but on the track at the same time. We've now 93 minutes and 62 laps done and dusted so far. I assume Rodriguez could be making another stop or two before the end. Probably one more stop at the end of this race. With 93 minutes left, done and dusted, with 62 laps. I do expect Rodriguez to make maybe one more pit stop before the end. It could be potentially a splash and dash, or he could do a complete tyre change. But it still appears to be dark out on the racetrack, so I assume morning may not be too far away, as this is a sped up cycle in terms of day to night and back into day to the final leg of the race. Once the sun does come back up again, we will expect to see the pace intensifying, but it doesn't appear with the fast-running prototypes the pace has dropped off that much in the darkness. If anything, Jose Barriga is pushing even further in the darkness to gain back the lost time made in his pit stop, as he is now 28 seconds adrift and only 11 seconds behind Edmund Wong. So in about 10 or so laps, he could be potentially challenging Edmund Wong for second place overall. Rick Scott is currently sitting in 4th place, 1 minute 19 seconds adrift, having his own race and staying consistent, but he could soon be coming under a bit of pressure from Rick Hyde. It appears that Rick Hyde may not be too far away from Rick Scott, but as we see Brett Bray back in the pit lane once again, he looks like he has some sort of damage to his front. I'm not too sure what's happened with that car. It could just be a normal scheduled stop, but they'll drop him back down, back into 17th place, with giving David Hoyo another position to make up from having multiple pit stops made, and was running 3rd place in the GT class in the earlier on in the race. But it appears the car has gone off the circuit a little bit. Not too sure what's happened there. I did see a car go. I think it was Marco Antonio Rodriguez. He probably was trying to overtake Alexis Clapano and went a little bit wide, but he managed to regain. I don't think he had any damage done to his car, so he will most likely continue on and to push hard. But he has opened the gap even further now. It's now up to 22 seconds over Edmund Wong. Edmund Wong will be dealing with traffic. All the prototypes have been struggling a bit in this traffic, as it's a very curvy, winding circuit, and opportunities to overtake the GTs usually happen in the brake zones and on the start-finish straight. In the second sector is quite slow corners, and it's very hard for the prototypes to get past the GTs with ease. But the gap is now down to 4 seconds between Edward Wong and Jose Barriga, so I expect Barriga to catch up even a lot sooner than I first thought. So a battle may form very shortly. Now it looks to be, instead of possibly 3 seconds now between himself and Edmund Wong, they could almost be in the same. They are in the same camera view, so a very strong battle will happen very shortly between these two drivers. We'll get back to them. Hopefully the gap will close a bit, but the hometown driver, Sebastian Rodriguez, getting up really early this morning, local time for him, to race, is paying off so far in this race, with only nearly 45 minutes left to go in this race. Just over 45 minutes. He has a very strong lead over Alexis Clapano, as Alexis Clapano will be driving solo this race. He may still walk away with a few points to keep his championship lead intact. as Clapano has a 27-second point lead over Sebastian Rodriguez. These in the points. Excuse me. As Rodriguez had a score of in the first 2 rounds, he had a 2nd place and had an issue at Suzuka where he was leading but had a collision with another vehicle, which forced him to lose not only the GT lead but several more positions as the race wound down. But Rodriguez still sits 2nd in the championship on 33 points compared to Morano and Clapano's 60 point lead. But it does look that Rodriguez will score a few more points and potentially keep the championship alive for him as they head into the final round. With this being the last 2.4-hour race of the season, a lot of the teams will most likely be trying to have their teammates, but it appears to be Faustino appears to be out of this race. I'm not too sure what's happened with him. I just saw him go DNF on the timing screens, but if it's not a proper retirement, he may still get back into this race as a prototype looks to be going into the pit lane. Not too sure. It's Rodriguez making another stop with 45 minutes or so left to go. This could be his last stop of the race as he's had very long stints with the fuel and tyres. So this could potentially put him into a position. Edmund Wong will have to look to see if he will continue to stay out for another couple of laps or so. I'm not too sure what I've noticed that Edmund Wong has stayed out a bit longer than other drivers in terms of fuel runs. So I think the Eureka may have a bit of a better fuel economy than, say, the Spanish entered Eurekas. Oh, Clapano looks to have spun on the track. I'm not too sure what's happened. I've just seen it as I was watching Edmund Wong that Clapano was facing the wrong way. This will give Rodriguez the advantage to extend the gap even further for the Brazilian driver. But the day hasn't been so well for Clapano having to drive solo in this race. He's still pushing really hard to ensure that he will still retain 2nd place in the GT class, but that will lessen the gap between Alvarez, who sits in 3rd place, with Ascar short, not too far behind Alvarez. The gap has still been quite even between the 2 drivers after Alvarez overtook Ascar a while ago in the race. But it appears that Paul Faustino has rejoined the race, so he must have disconnected and will be able to get back into the race. We have had a couple of another driver disconnect. Kelvin Wong was one of the drivers to disconnect early in the race, but he's back out on the circuit as well. As we see Paul Faustino exiting the pit lane, he will now drop down into 17th place and dead last in the running order, but he will still be able to come back out and potentially get himself some potential points depending on how the position goes for him at the end of the race. With only 42 minutes left to go, he could still have time to push in some really good laps and be able to potentially get a couple of more positions to improve his championship hopes. But still out in front of the GT class, Sebastian Rodriguez, I've barely been able to watch him for the entirety of the race because nothing seems to be happening with Rodriguez. He's out on his own, pushing really hard in that that orange Porsche, my mistake. Staying out of trouble and doing his consistent pit stops. He's having a very good run. But Edmund Wong still now has the lead of the race. He will continue to do another lap or so. I expect him to come in the next within the next 5 or so laps or so, depending on how he goes on this fuel run. But Barenga is very close behind, only 2 seconds behind Edmund Wong. Barenga's pace is a bit consistent time-wise, is better than Edmund Wong, so I do expect Jose Barenga to come under pressure very shortly from Jose Barenga. He will want to be retake that lead of the race, while Marco Antonio Rodriguez, who was leading for quite a bit of time after the last pit stop cycle, is now 51 seconds adrift in 3rd place, and only 8 seconds ahead of Rick Scott in basically the only closed cockpit prototype in the field today. As the open cockpit prototypes have become a very popular choice for the drivers in this series, with only a handful of cars only entering closed cockpit prototypes, mainly because the fact that the open top prototypes like the Eureka and the Gisborne are a good choice, as they, without having the restrictions of the roof of the car, they can see a lot more and be able to push even harder without having that claustrophobic feel when driving the Ligier. Now the gap is now down to 1 second between Edmund Wong and Jose Barenga, but it appears that Edmund Wong has spun on the first corner. That will give Barenga the lead of the race. It looked like Edmund Wong did have a spin on his own, no assistance by the looks of it, but he has managed to get himself back running again as Rick Hyde also now makes his pit stop, potentially his last pit stop of the race. Rick Hyde's been having a very quiet race, staying out of trouble and being consistently in 5th place throughout the course of this race, only 1 lap down over the race leader. That now puts Jose Barenga, who won the last round at Suzuka, back into the lead of this race and potentially in the line for another race win this season, as he has been very consistently probably the fastest driver in this race so far. While Edmund Wong is now lost 6 seconds over Barenga after his spin on the corner just moments ago. Marco Antonio Rodriguez, the championship leader, has now lessened the gap to now 49 seconds over Jose Barenga, but we've still got 38 minutes left remaining in this race, as Jared van der Weide also enters the pit lane to make another scheduled pit stop. By the looks of it, he could be making his last one of the race. He's very slow entering the pit lane, not too sure what's happened there. He could just be looking for his pit stall, which is another problem the drivers have faced this race so far, is several drivers have been missing their pit stall because of the rain that occurred in the race earlier, which has made not just the track wet but also the pit lane wet. And the pit lane, because the drivers going through the pit lane, they have been, and on the slick tyres, several of the drivers have missed their pit stalls and were forced to reverse back into their pit stall to make their pit stop. Jared van der Weide will lose a couple of positions. He already lost a position over Gujay Carr, but David Hoy's a lap or so behind Jared van der Weide. Rick Scott himself now also enters the pit lane for his pit stop, potentially his last pit stop of the race. Rick Scott has been managing to stay out a bit longer than the Eurekas of Rodriguez, Wong, and Jose Barenga. It could be an advantage of that Ligier to stay out longer on the longer fuel runs, having a better fuel economy. But he's only a lap down. So depending on how it goes, and he can keep his pace up, and if something were to happen to the top 3, Rick Scott could put himself into a possibility. He's back out on the pit lane. He must have just had a splash and dash. He could be double stinting those tyres to the end. That was a very quick pit stop by the looks of it. So I assume he will most likely have splashed and dashed, put some fuel in the car, and hopefully they'll get him to this race. The battle is on between Dean Jose and Gu J Car. The two are battling for 12th place in the overall, and Gu J Car is trying to get around Dean Jose, as these two have formed a bit of a battle between the two of them. So these two drivers will be looking to battle it out with only less than 40 minutes, just over 30 minutes left to go in this race. These two drivers will be pushing hard to get ahead of one another. Dean Jose will want to retain 12th place overall, while Gu J Car will want to gain another spot. These two are in fact on the lead lap, so a battle will form. But it appears that Jose has a bit of an advantage over JK in the corners, but we'll have to wait and see how JK does on the straights, as he goes very wide indeed on the final corner. He will have to be careful and not to receive a penalty if he keeps going wide like that. But by going wide, he's lost precious real estate ahead, and that'll open up the gap for Dean Jose to breathe a little easier now, knowing that Gu JK is a bit further behind now. So if Dean Jose can keep that pace up, he will still retain 12th place. But Gu JK is pushing really hard to make up for the lost time. He's going wide once again. He's got to really be careful at this point, because if he gets too many warnings for going wide, he will incur a penalty for extending track limits. So he's got to balance between being fast but not track extend, because track extending is something that has got several drivers pinged over the course of the season, with drivers going off the racetrack to find time or go wide, and they get warnings and then a penalty, usually a stop and go penalty. So JK will have to try and find some pace, but at the same time not go off the circuit. It appears that Gu JK is closing the gap a little bit. It does appear the gap is... So we'll have to wait and see how it all goes for that battle. But out in front, Jose Barringas still leads by now 10 seconds over Edwin Wong. Jose Barringas' pace has been very strong all race thus far, having lost the only time losing positions is when he makes his pit stops. But Edwin Wong, I believe he's made his last pit stop of the race, as has Barringa may have already made his last pit stop, but I'm certain that Rodriguez, Rick Scott, Rick Hyde set to go to the end of the race, as we only have just over 30 minutes left to go. Kelvin Wong, who's now worked his way back up into 6th place overall, after having many issues over the course of this race, 5 laps down. He's in the pit lane, possibly having a splash and dash to get himself to the end of this race, as the gap has now opened up between Gu J Car has actually overtaken Dean Jose. Jose must have had some sort of issue, as we were looking at Kelvin Wong in the pit lane. As I was looking at Kelvin Wong in the pit lane, Gu JK has now gained 12th place, and the gap is quite strong, but quite large between the two drivers. There must have been some sort of issue for Dean Jose earlier on, just moments ago. I'm terribly sorry that I missed that action. But the Gu JK is now up into 12th place in this race, and now 6th place in the GT class. So he's going to be looking to push really hard to retain that 12th place, as Dean Jose will be looking to push even harder to gain back position. Kelvin Wong will now be exiting the pit lane, losing a couple of positions. For what I'm getting told, Dean has crashed actually. He's spun the car now. It looks to be major damage. His car looks to be hopping around a bit, but he gets back out on the circuit again. So that's gone. It hasn't had the best couple of laps of Dean Jose. Hopefully he will be able to continue racing on, and hopefully he hasn't had any major damage to that car. But he has just gone off the circuit. But it will be hard to tell what damage he has to the car until he remains straight, if he has suspension damage or bodywork damage. But it doesn't appear to be any body damage, as Kelvin Wong looks to be out of this race with an engine failure. It looks like on my timing screen something engine. He could be out of this race, so that could be the fourth retirement of the race. It does look like he is in the pit box with engine written next to it, so he may have had an engine failure during the race. It's just absolute but as Kelvin Wong now will be moving down the timing sheets, we'll have to look to see what's happened with, I believe that was Kelvin Wong now. Edmund Wong is now in the pit lane, possibly I could have sworn he already made a pit stop already, but he is back in the pit lane once again. Probably realised he hasn't had enough fuel to finish the race, so he's most likely will be trying to top up the petrol in his Oreca to get him off to the end, but he will lose a stack of time over Jose Barrenga, who's still out in front. The gap was 16 seconds when Edmund Wong went in the pit lane, but that gap is only certain to get larger as the longer Edmund Wong stays in the pit lane. But he Kelvin Wong looks to have it did say on the screen that he has rejoined the race, but not too sure. I don't think I can confirm that Kelvin Wong has retired from this race, as Edmund Wong will now has now exited the pit lane. The temperatures have increased over the course of the night, with the temperature now at 26 degrees, both ambient and track temperature. So this will put a lot more strain on the engines of all the cars, which probably could explain why Kelvin Wong has retired from the race. Several drivers are mentioning that the engine temps are getting hot for these cars with the sudden increase of the temperature of the humidity of the circuit. But we're only 116 minutes into 144. We only have just less than 30 minutes, nearly 20 minutes left until the end of this race. But still, out in front, in first place in the prototype and overall, is Jose Barrenga. Now the gap is up to 56 seconds over Marco Antonio Rodriguez, who's just starting the 78th lap of the race. 56 seconds is the gap, but Marco Antonio Rodriguez would be thinking right now he doesn't need to push too hard, especially knowing that Kelvin Wong is out of the race, potentially with I suspect the engine has failed due to some sort of issue. But Marco Antonio Rodriguez would be thinking right now not to be pushing too hard, as he is the championship leader of the prototype class, and with Aaron Taruna and Fahid Ghafour not participating in this round, this could potentially play into the favour of Antonio Rodriguez's championship hopes, as he will just continue to lap around the circuit and gain those valuable points to extend his championship lead, having gained the championship lead at the last round at Suzuka, with Aaron Taruna retiring early in the race. Marco Antonio Rodriguez came in second place at Suzuka and gained the championship lead. This will sure to continue this round with gaining a valuable potentially 14 points for second place. But all these points will matter very strongly for Marco Antonio Rodriguez, as there's only one round remaining in this series. So Marco Antonio Rodriguez will be wanting to gain as many points as possible for his championship hopes. Sitting in third place in the prototype class is Edmund Wong, who's had a very quiet race as well. He's one of several drivers to have a very quiet race, nice and consistent, staying out on the track as much as possible and avoiding the GT traffic and other prototypes. Edmund Wong will look surely to be getting some extra points for this weekend, as he's currently laying, I believe, from my memory, Edmund Wong is currently sitting 6th place in the championship with 16 points. So that a potential podium today could put him in a position to gain potentially 10 points. That'll help him quite a lot in his championship hopes. Excuse me. But in 4th place in the prototype class is Rick Scott, who's also another driver who's had a very quiet day. I could go on all for the rest of this race about drivers having very quiet days, as we are roughly 24 or so minutes left remaining in this race. Rick Scott is only a lap down, but he too will score some valuable points that will prove beneficial for him championship wise, as Rick Scott's prototype, the British driver, will be wanting to improve himself and move up several positions, as he only has 6 points so far this season, having the first 2 rounds having scored no points and scoring 6 points in the 3rd round. He's sitting currently 9th in the championship, so if he holds off the way he is now, he could walk away with extra points that will prove valuable to his championship hopes of improving a better position. Mathematically, he's out of the running for the championship, but he can still gain more and more points to move up several spots, as he only has to contend with Chris Osley, who doesn't appear to be racing this weekend. So he'll most likely move up into 8th place in the championship. Kelvin Wong, who has retired from this race, he's now down 17th on the timing chart, and he will score no points for the round. So he'll most likely be dropping up a position or so, as Rick Scott could potentially be walking away with 8 or so, or 10, maybe 8 points, I believe, for 4th place. So he could potentially move himself up to actually, by the mathematics of the points, he could move up 2 spots or so in the championship standings. But in 5th place we have Rick Hyde, who's there are so many drivers today who've actually had a quiet race. Rick Hyde is another one of those drivers who's been very consistent, 2 laps down on the race leader, but still pushing really hard in 5th place. In the GT class, Sebastian Rodriguez has barely been challenged so far in this race, with only just over 20 minutes left to go in this race. The only thing that could stop him from winning this race is if he has some sort of issue, but hopefully that may not be the case. Might want to knock on wood for the hometown driver, who is representing Brazil for this race in the Brazilian round. So he has some very good knowledge of the circuit, and it's been being able to stay out, consistently make his scheduled pit stops, and stay out all the back marker traffic. Alexis Clapano, 7th place and 2nd in the GT class. He's had he's had a few mistakes over the course of this race. As I say that, he's spun the car once again. He's going to be caught himself into a bit of an awkward spot. He's got to be careful as a prototype goes through. That was Rick Hyde who just went through. Calpano's going to be very careful not to collide with any drivers, because even though he is the leader of the GT class championship with his teammate Lewis Morano, he doesn't want to afford to have any mistakes that will lose him valuable positions. But as the results stand, Calpano and Morano's perfect run of the season so far may come undone. But it appears the BMW of Calpano looks to be getting a little bit loose in certain sections. I'm not too sure, but I think it could just be accelerating a bit too soon out of the corners, trying to gain back the time he lost when he spun around. But that's going to play into the role of Rodriguez quite well, as Rodriguez has a very large gap over Calpano. Sitting in third place in the GT class, so we have Andros Alvarez, who's had a up and down race so far. He's been up the standings, down the standings, but he's now sitting well positioned in third place. He was under pressure from Mohamed Azkar a while ago, but it appears that Mohamed Azkar has fallen a fair way back. But as Mohamed Azkar, he's had a very consistent race so far, having stayed out as much trouble as he can. But potentially he could still catch up to Alvarez for third place in the class. But he's running out of time. He's only got 19 minutes left remaining in this race. But Jalil is also on the same lap as Azkar. So with Jalil sitting in 10th overall and 5th in the GT class, Jalil has had a bit of a very up and down, more of an up and down race than any other driver, as he was one of 2 drivers to get one of 3 drivers, my mistake, to get involved in an incident on the second corner of the first lap. The other drivers included Marco Antonio Rodriguez and Gu JK. Rodriguez ended up speeding the car on turn 2, and that left JK and Jalil with nowhere to go but into the side of Antonio Rodriguez. But both drivers have moved themselves back up several places and are running very strongly, with Jalil running in 10th and JK running in 11th. Dean Jose is running strongly in 12th. He was battling with Gu JK earlier, but JK did get a Dean Jose sorry, did have an issue with the car, having spun the car, which gave JK the position of 11th place. Quinton Plain is running quite strongly in 13th place at 9 laps clear of the 9 laps down on the race leader, sitting well strong. He has dropped off time a bit with the last lap doing the last couple laps ago doing a 151. From the information I'm getting told, Quinton spun out at some point, probably on lap 57, and got into an issue with another driver. The information I'm getting is Quinton was spun as a hidden spinning out. That's the information I'm getting. I will try and get some more information as it comes to hand regarding Quinton Plain, but he had dropped off the pace on lap 75 of this race. But he looks to be getting back on the consistency, as we do see a battle between Brett Gray and Paul Faustino for 15th place in the race. These 2 drivers are coming to blows on the first and second corner, as Brett Gray narrowly holds on to 15th place, as Paul Faustino is trying to gain that position. These 2 drivers are on the same lap, as Faustino is probably looking to have a look at turn 3. but it doesn't look to be. He looks to be too far behind to be able to get the job done. But he will be looking to stick behind the rear end of Brett Gray as Faustino goes right side by side, but doesn't have enough room to be able to make the move stick, as he's still about 2 or 3 car lengths behind. But Brett Gray will be not only trying to look forward to keep his race lines, but at the same time he will be looking at his mirrors to see where Paul Faustino will be. These two drivers will be pushing the hardest with only oh, it appears another driver has spun. I'm not too sure which driver it was. It looked like Dean Jose. It was Dean Jose in the Vulcan Porsche. Oh, he's just come back on the track. Oh, I believe that was Sebastian Rodriguez. Dean Jose come back on the circuit, and Rodriguez, by the looks of it, nearly T-boned him. Not too sure. It is Sebastian Rodriguez. He has flashed his headlights furiously as Dean Jose spun and tried to get back on the track. Sebastian Rodriguez came onto the scene and almost had nowhere to go. He may have just tapped Dean Jose. So this could be some serious implications, not just for the gap-wise between Rodriguez and Clapano, but I think Dean Jose may get in a little bit of trouble from the race directors after the race for that incident, as it looked like he just went back onto the track without even realizing who is there. But Dean Jose will continue, as does Sebastian Rodriguez. The gap does seem to be still strong, as Clapano is only just starting to come onto the start-finish straight, while Sebastian Rodriguez is still going through turn 4 or 5. So the gap is still strong, strong for these drivers, as Clapano starts his 81st lap and Sebastian Rodriguez is halfway through his 81st lap. The gap is very strong, as we only have 14 or so minutes left to go in this race. We've just had action packed in the last couple of minutes or so. But the Paul Faustino, as we were talking about Sebastian Rodriguez, Paul Faustino has found his way past Brett, 15th place of this race, but Brett Gray is trying to push himself back into a spot where he could be able to take 15th place back. These two drivers will be battling it out for the next 13 minutes or so left in this race. I apologise for my sore throat. But Paul Faustino will be trying to... Paul Faustino gets the car a bit loose. That will give Brett Gray a possibility of trying to get that an easy draft coming into the third corner. They did get quite loose coming out of the third corner as they head into the fourth, but I think Brett may be too far behind. 2 or 3 car lengths separate the two. But Brecco may be looking to potentially look for another move. He doesn't have much time left in this race to make a move. But if he's going to make a move, he's going to have to make a move in the next couple of laps or so, try and regain that gap. But the gap seems to be growing between Faustino and Gray, but Gray's trying to brake as late as he can within reason to try and catch up to Faustino, as Faustino is trying to slowly get away from Brett Gray. Edmund Wong who's sitting in 3rd place in the prototype class, has now gone down a lap. So the only driver left on the lead lap in the prototype class is Marco Antonio Rodriguez, only 1 minute and 9 seconds behind, as Barenga is storming the lead with only 12 or so minutes left remaining in the race. This will play a major role, as the sun is starting to rise a little bit by look. So we're going to have the last 10 or so minutes of the race in the sunlight, and so the battle is still on between Paul Faustino and Brett Gray. These two guys will be battling it out as the sun rises. Brett Gray looks to try to go for a bit of a dive into the second corner, but was unable to get the job done. But he will try and have a bit of a run into turn 4. There will be a good opportunity for him to try and overtake. He's having a bit of a look, but it doesn't seems to be too far back for him to be able to pull the move off. But the sun is now starting to rise properly now. We can definitely see the track lighting up. Brett Gray is flashing the headlights, trying to... Paul Faustino is right behind him. as they head into the twisty corners of 6 and 7. Brett Gray is trying his best to get around Flostino. These two guys are going to be pushing it as much as they can. Plus, with Brett Gray trying to give the headlights a bit of a flash to say, hey, I'm right behind you, but don't forget about me. As Rick Scott comes into the picture, these two guys will be trying to battle out. Rick Scott will be like, let me stay out of this. He just wants to get past. But he's going to have to stick behind these two GT drivers until he gets a main straight. But Rick is trying to figure out which side of the track he's going to move to. As Flostino is lost a bit of space, this will give Brett Gray a bit of an opportunity to get him right onto his rear bumper, as the less than a car length separates the two. As Rick Scott is also battling with Rick Hyde for 4th place. 4th and 5th will be battling with at the same time. The two guys side by side going to the first turn. Paul Flostino got between Rick Hyde and Rick Scott. Right now on the same screen we have the battle for 4th and 5th, as Rick Hyde just gave Paul Flostino a bit of a tap, as give Brett Gray a bit of an opportunity to get ahead. But on the same screen we have the battle for 4th and 5th and 15th and 16th. But the two prototypes are now getting away. Now they're going to have to contend with Jalul, as Rick Scott is trying to defend that position. Rick Hyde, who has been quiet all race, is now trying to make some moves now, as we only have 10 minutes left remaining. Rick Hyde is running out of an opportunity to overtake Rick Scott. But it appears that these two are pushing really hard and trying to go wheel to wheel against each other. Brett Gray has now gone up ahead of Paul Flostino, as Jalul is a bit behind. Jalul's only 3 or so laps ahead of these two guys, so Brett Gray may not be bothered trying to go past Jalul, but Jalul's pace seems to be off a little bit as Brett Gray is catching up to Jalul. These two will be pushing quite hard as Mohammed Askar goes in the pit stop for potentially a splash and dash to the final lane with 9 minutes left remaining. I'm not too sure why he's in the pit lane. He may have miscalculated how much fuel he's got in the car, but the battle is still on for 4th and 5th place between Rick Scott and Rick Hyde. Rick Hyde is right on underneath the rear wing of Rick Scott's Ligier. It'll be Ligier versus Zytek for the final couple of minutes of this race. But Brett Gray has now extended a bit of a gap between Paul Flostino, so we'll probably try and stick to Rick Scott and Rick Hyde. The two Ricks are battling it out with 8 minutes left to go. Rick goes a little bit wide but cuts back. They both trade spots on the road, but Rick Scott goes a little bit wide. That'll give Rick Hyde the opportunity to go into 4th place. Rick Hyde now into 4th place. And I have just realised this whole time that with the excitement of the battle between these two drivers, that Rick Hyde is 2 laps, about a lap or so down. So that put Rick Hyde on the lead lap. I have not even realised that. I'm terribly sorry that these two guys were trying to battle. Rick Hyde was trying to get himself onto the lead lap of Rick Scott, and Rick Scott was not giving up. Rick Scott has realised that he's gonna just have to let Rick Hyde go. I got so excited I didn't even realise that Rick Hyde was a lap down on Rick Scott. These two drivers were pushing quite hard, but the battle between Brett Gray and Paul Flostino is not over yet, but as Paul Flostino is right back behind Brett Gray, still 4 or 5 car lengths separates the two, as we only have minutes left remaining in the session. as Brett Gray goes quite wide into the first corner, Paul Flostino is going to be trying to take advantage. As Brett Gray still has 15th place, these two guys are battling to 15th place. Brett Gray still got 15th position, but Paul Flostino has caught up to him once again. I think he potentially has him going around the corner, but Brett Gray has the inside line advantage over the Porsche of Paul Flostino. But Jalul is not too far behind. Jalul is several laps ahead, but he's not going to even bother trying to go around these guys. slow and holding Jalul up, but Jalul is still looking to. He's still got a fair distance between himself and Andros Alvarez, so he's not too content on trying to get around these two guys, trying to push hard for the 15th position. But Brett Gray has once again extended the lead as Paul Faustino, for a second there, looked like he went. It almost looked like on my screen that he got tapped by Jalul, but that tap just now just looked like a tap. But Brett Gray, not too sure. For a second, I thought he was going to go in the pit lane, but he took a racing line. As we are now 5 minutes away from the end of this race, Jose Berenga is still in the lead of the race overall in the prototype class. 1 minute and 15 seconds behind is his teammate Marco Antonio Rodriguez, who will extend his championship lead after this race. As the battle is still on between, a battle is now forming between Dean Jose and Quinton Plain for 12th place, as Quinton Plain goes for an overtake into the first corner and gets the job done, but Dean Jose has a chance, but he goes a bit wide into the second corner. That gives Quinton Plain the opportunity to go up ahead in the Corvette. He must have changed places with Fender Wide at some point in this race. They must have driver swapped for the final stint, but Paul Faustino tries to lock up, tries to go for a bit of a dive bomb with only 5 minutes left remaining, 4 minutes left remaining. Dean Jose has lost a lot of ground, so this could potentially ruin his chances of 12th place. Paul Faustino still trying to put a lot of pressure on the Brett Gray for 15th place. We've only got 4 minutes left remaining in this, 4 or 5 minutes left remaining in the session, but the gap is now about 5 or 6 car lengths between Brett Gray and Paul Faustino, as the battle for 12th place is still intensifying between Quinton Plain, but Quinton Plain has extended the gap quite a bit, so unless he makes a may not pressure with a few minutes left remaining in the race. Jose Berenga is in the pit lane. With minutes left to go, Berenga is in the pit lane. This could have some serious implications for this race. Excuse me. Berenga could be in a pit stop for a splash and dash. It doesn't appear he's going for a tyre change. With minutes left to remaining, he must have run out of tyre wear in his car. So he's going to be pitting for the full set of tyres and maybe fuel also to finish off the race. So this could give Marco Antonio Rodriguez the opportunity to catch up. This also gives Edmund Wong the opportunity to go back on the lead lap, as does Rick Scott. As Rick Scott goes for turn 3, overtaking Goo JK. As Jose Berenga now gets back underway, he may have just changed tyres. I'm sorry, my voice is failing on me, but with minutes left remaining in this race, it has now come down to quite a bit. As Paul Faustino's car looks to be on fire. He must have had some sort of engine issue. His race is done. By the looks of it, he's pulling over to the side. His car is overheated and he's out. Having such a big battle between himself and Brett Gray is now all gone up in flames, figuratively and really. It's an absolute shame. He was running quite well all day, but that potentially could be our 5th retirement of the race. With only just minutes left remaining, he's rolling to a stop. He would be retiring to the pit lane now. That's the end of his race. It's just an absolute shame. Hopefully he will be back for the final round at Bathurst for the 6th hour, but that will give Brett Gray confirmed for 15th place overall in the race. Marco Antonio Rodriguez has now taken the lead of the race, as we were focusing Cito, the championship leader, has now taken the lead of the race and has a 1 second advantage with only less than 2 minutes left remaining. He will cross the line to start one last lap. It'll be 1-2 for the Spanish team. One more lap confirmed. It's with 1 minute left remaining. Marco Antonio Rodriguez has taken the lead from Jose Berenga, with Berenga taking a last second potential pit stop. It has now cost him the race, as Paul Faustino's car is now still sitting out on the middle of the track. Marco Antonio Rodriguez will now be on his final lap, as the clock is now ticked down to 0, as the 2.4 hours of Interlagos is about to come to an end. All the top 4 are all within a minute of each other, with Nick Hyde in 5th place, but with such a lead, Sebastian Rodriguez is also on his final lap as well. But this will now play even a big further role in for Marco Antonio Rodriguez, as he is the championship leader. He will now walk away with potentially a full 10 points to his championship, as Jose Berenga's last second attempt at a pit stop, having tyres failed in him, has now cost him the win, but only by 1.6 seconds. Marco Antonio Rodriguez will cross the line to take the 2.4 hours of Interlagos. Jose Berenga's last minute pit stop for tyres has cost him dearly. He has lost the race by 1.4 seconds. Edmund Wong will also be crossing the line very shortly to take 3rd place, with Rick Scott potentially going for a 4th place. It's Sebastian Rodriguez, the hometown Brazilian, will take the win in the GT class. Alexis Clapano will potentially finish shortly as well, but Jalul will cross the line to finish 9th overall, as Mohamed Azkar will also take 10. Still yet to cross the finish line, we have Rick Scott and Rick Hyde, Alexis Clapano, Andros Alvarez, Gu JK. Quinton Plain has crossed the line to take 12th place, as David Hyo has taken 14th place. Brett Clay looks to be stopped on the track. I'm not too sure what's going on here. The yellow flags are waving. I am not too sure what's going on. He's stuck there. He has spun the car. The car is facing the wrong way, as Dean Jose will cross the line to take 13th place. Gu JK will now be crossing the final corner to take 11th spot, and Brett Gray has retired because of a accident. He may have lost a wheel or some sort. I'm not too sure what's happened with him, but Paul Faustino is still sitting on the track. Dean Jose is having a bit of a paint swapping session, but it looks to be pushing Paul Faustino's car off the track and back onto the racetrack in front of Ju JK. But I am not too sure what's going on here. It seems to be going off here because JK is crashing all over the shop, but Jose Berenga and Marco Antonio Rodriguez and Jose Berenga will take it as a 1-2 for the all-Spanish World of Sim Racing team, as Sebastian Rodriguez will do his celebratory donuts as he just gets that little tap from Mohamed Azkar as he enters the pit lane. And with the race being done, in the GT class, it's Sebastian Rodriguez, Alexis Clapano, and Andros Alvarez. So we'll round up the podium position with Andros Alvarez representing the World of Sim Sport team, the all-Spanish team. So it's a 1-2 in the prototype class for the Spanish team and a 3rd place in the GT class. So it's been a very successful day for that team. Hopefully we will be able to have a word with several of the drivers as the race has now been completed. But a very successful win by the Marco Antonio Rodriguez, having taken advantage of a very last-minute pit stop by Jose Berenga. Not too sure why Berenga made that pit stop with several minutes left to go, but we will try and find out some more information about that. Please join us very shortly as we will try and talk to several of the drivers to give us a word on today's race. But overall, the race was pretty chaotic from the start, and it calmed itself down from the middle part of the section. But it all heated up once the sun came up, with several positions and retirements in the last couple of minutes of the race. But I'll give you a quick highlight of the race. At the start of the race, pole sitter Jose Berengo got off to a really good start, but it was his teammate his teammate who had a came together with the GT of Jalul and Gu JK on the second corner, which put all three drivers into a bad position throughout the course of the race. But as the race progressed, several drivers had issues, including Kelvin Wong, who ended up getting disconnected and being brought back into the game. He managed to come home, and sadly, he retired actually midway through the race, which is a bit sad affairs. But overall, in the final, with so many battles between Azkar Jalul and David Hoyo throughout the race, which made a lot of entertainment for the drivers. As we will try and have a word with several of the drivers to give us their thoughts on the race. Please bear with us for a few minutes as we try and get that organised. Joining us right now, we have Alexis Clapano from Ambu Racing, having started on the front row grid of the GT class and coming home in second. Alexis, how was the race for you?
Yes, pretty much. It was actually fast with my pace. I think Seb committing not to pit during the rain paid off. So yeah.
Yes, because several drivers pitted for tyres, wets, including yourself. How long did how did the race go on the wets?
I can't quite. Where the track started to dry out. So yeah.
Well, with second place, the hot streak that Ambu Racing has had over the championship is now over, and Sebastian Rodriguez has taken the win. Will this affect your momentum heading into the final round at Bathurst?
Well, all we gotta do is do our best. We'll try to bounce back the next race. So yeah.
Well, it was a very tough race for everyone up and down the field, including yourself. Your teammate was not here today, so how did it affect you personally, knowing you had to drive the entire race?
It was really tiring. To be honest with you. But I actually did quite good with 2.4 hours of racing. So yeah, it was fine.
Well, once again, thank you, Alexis Clapano, for joining us to give us a word on the race, and hopefully we wish you the best of luck for the 6-hour race still to come at the end of the season.
Yeah, sure. Thanks for having me.
That was Alexis Clapano from Ambu Racing, who finished second place in the GT class for today's race. As you heard from Alexis, he pitted for wet when it started raining, but the rain didn't last that long, which was a gamble that didn't pay off in his favour, as it did for the eventual GT class winner, Sebastian Rodriguez. Hopefully we'll try and have a word with several more drivers to give us their thoughts on the race.
Mate, we'll slot you into Ron's team, man. Don't worry. So if you hover over rFactor to RF2 Championships and then WEC.
I'm so sorry, ladies, but I'm not too sure what's just happened there. We had Brett Gray enter the commentary. Must have entered the wrong channel, but we'll try and have a chat with Brett about his race very shortly. He does seem a little bit keen to have a bit of a chat race. I do apologise for that. We will try and have a word with several of the drivers. Please bear with us for a few minutes as we try and get this organised. We want to try and have a word with several of the drivers to give us their thoughts on today's race, as it was a very chaotic race. Not as chaotic as the other rounds, but still chaotic nonetheless, with 20 starters and only 5, well, technically 7 retirements when you think about it in the final couple of laps, as Paul Festino, who was battling with Brett, I believe it was Brett Gray for 15th position, retired with an engine failure. And then it looked like Brett Gray also retired on the very last lap with an issue with the car. Not too sure what happened with Brett Gray, but we'll try and get some word as to what happened with Brett Gray on that final lap of the race, because once the race was finished, we saw Brett Gray's car facing the very wrong way after turn 3. And joining us now, we have Jared from the black and orange Corvette. Jared, how did the race go for you? Jared?
Sorry, that was my bad. My microphone died. Yeah, good day. Yeah, it was an interesting race. We made a mistake. We went with the wet tyres at the start of the race because we expected rain at the beginning, but it did not happen. So we went 5 laps into the race, start of the race with the wet tyres, and lost a bucket load of time. And then we had to pit, so that was even more time. So we were down at last by the first 20 minutes. We just slowly crawled our way back up the field to where we finished in 13th, I think, 12th maybe. But we had the pace for P3 in our class, especially if there was more rain. We did have a very quick wet setup prepared, so a bit of a race of could have been, but wasn't to be, unfortunately.
Well, the pace was looking good. We were wondering why the you guys did pit it early in the race, but as you have told us now, we now know what happened with you guys, which is an absolute shame to hear. But hopefully we'll have a bit more luck with the final round being a 6-hour race. How do you feel your team will go for the final race of the season?
Yeah, we're going to be really, really prepared for this one. Bathurst is obviously a home track for me in Australia, so I know it extremely well. And yeah, we're going to be really ready because we both like the track, and our setup at the moment is really, really strong. So we're going to base it off this track and then edit it a little bit. And yeah, 6 hours is no stranger to me, so we'll be right.
So will just be you and your teammate, or will you potentially be getting a third driver to fill in, as it is a very long race?
Nah, it'll just be us two.
Well, yeah, your pace has been good all season. Hopefully it can all pay off in the final round. If all the strategy works for you, we'd like to wish you the best of luck.
Yeah, thanks, man. Hopefully we'll keep our fingers crossed.
That was Jared, who finished quite well in the Corvette today after having made the wrong call in terms of strategy, but they managed to move themselves up and finish roughly 12th place or so in the overall in the race, which was an absolute brilliant effort for the team. Several drivers were caught out with the rain, several teams starting with wets, but also several teams pitting for wet tyres as the rain came, as Alexis Clapano also said earlier that the rain came, but it didn't stay for long, roughly 8 laps or so, which was an absolute shame for most of the drivers, but several drivers were also caught out in the rain as well, as they went off the racing line at several points, which did cause them a bit of grief. But overall, this whole race has been absolutely a good test of endurance for several drivers. As several drivers from several teams have been running solo for the last several races. We've seen a lot of improvement from a lot of the teams as the season has progressed. But it was a shame we've seen several retirements over the course of this race, including Chris Payne. I believe it was Kelvin Wong, as well as another one of the drivers having to retire from the race. And this will all, hopefully they will be able to perform a bit better than they would like to think in the final round. But with it being 6 hours, the final round, this is going to be an absolute challenge for several of the teams, as some teams have one driver, and they may need to have an extra driver on board to complete the race successfully. But Sebastian Rodriguez is another one of those drivers who did win the GT class today, but he also won the Suzuka 1000 endurance race earlier this year, a couple of months or so ago, by doing the whole race himself. So there's always that possibility of doing the race on your own, but looking at how Alexis Clepano was saying, that it was very difficult to do just 2.4 hours, let alone having to do 6 hours on your own. So I do expect to see several teams that are currently running one driver at the moment to have another driver on the team for the next race. As not only 6 hours is also difficult on any circuit, let alone Bathurst, that's also going to play several key roles, as the prototype championship will still be wide open for the taking, as Antonio Rodriguez, Marco Antonio Rodriguez, will now extend the championship lead even further after taking that last second win, taking the lead at the very last minute to win the race today. So we will expect to see a good performance coming in for the final race. So the champion, but by calculations, they would have scored now 20 points towards their championship, which will give them a very strong boost of roughly 54 points or so from calculations. So coming into the final round, the championship will still be nice and hot for the P2, as is the GT class, as Sebastian Rodriguez will walk away with 20 points or so, so that could still put Rodriguez in a position to win the GT championship as well. So we like you to all join us on November 12th, as we will have the 6 hours of Bathurst for the final round of the RF2 Asia Endurance Series. I've been Lachlan Andrews, and I'll see you next time on RF2 Asia TV. Thank you and good night.